All right, what's going on? Drive Time Thursday afternoon, 8 minutes past the hour of 2 o'clock. It is sunny and it is clear, and it's warmer than it's been in probably, 2 weeks or so. It's about 35 degrees outside. And as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts behind the mic hosting the program today. We are jam-packed on this Thursday afternoon. Porter Larson behind the glass producing. Great guest list to talk a little college basketball, a little NBA. We'll do some college football and some NFL as we are high speed ahead to championship weekend in pro football, conference championship weekend in pro football. And, of course, you can hear the games on our radio station with the Commanders and the Eagles kicking off at 1 o'clock Mountain Time on Sunday. Game can be seen on Fox, and you can hear it on ESPN 700. The line has moved the way of the Commanders twice. As we sit here today, Philly is a 6-point favorite, but I have heard a lot of very smart football people believe that the Commanders got a little something here and might be able to roll into Lincoln Financial Field and upset the Philadelphia Eagles. Only time will tell. Buffalo Bills on the road against the Kansas City Chiefs. Arrowhead. That's going to be a 4:30 kick. You can see that game on CBS or Paramount Plus if you're one of the 7 people in the world that have Paramount Plus. Although Yellowstone was on Yellowstone Plus. Little known fact, Porter Larson auditioned for Yellowstone, and they cut his scene. Dave Fox somehow bullied his way on the program and was able to announce that John Dutton had died. Spoiler alert if you've not seen the last season. Random, non-sequitur Yellowstone info on the show. All right, University of Utah men's basketball team went down to Houston and got dog-walked. It was 8-5. At one point, it was 8-5. And then after that, it didn't go well. Your leading scorer was Gabe Madsen with 8 points. Houston might – we're going to have Ken Pomeroy live in studio. They've got to be a national championship contender, certainly a Final Four contender. But the Utah men, after winning 3 straight, went down to Houston and got smoked. They're back in Salt Lake City for a game against Baylor on Saturday at 2:30. So let me just say this. Craig Smith, after the BYU win, and I feel like this was very, very intentional, very poignant comments about how fans affect winning. I know it's been frustrating with the program for a number of years. Craig is a good coach. He's won wherever he's been, and he's a good man. So I will encourage people, if you don't have anything to do on Saturday at 2:30, head to the Huntsman Center. Let's make that BYU crowd something that is consistent, and it will only help the program. So we'll get to the game last night a little bit. That was mostly a commentary on how good Houston is as opposed to Utah men's basketball. They had won 3 straight Big 12 games, so we'll see if they can bounce back coming up on Saturday. Utah women really wasn't even close against Kansas. Yana Neepkins with a career-high 6 She also had 30 points. At one point, I think it was 21-5. So the Utah women improved to 5-3 in conference, 14-5 overall. They are at BYU coming up on Saturday, which is also a 2:30 time. Interesting. Conflicts left and right. The Jazz got shade last night. They got SGA'd last night. Utah Jazz went down to OKC and actually played well. That game was tied at 106. But as we often talk about, the main difference between the Jazz and some of the other teams that have gone through a rebuild or currently kind of trying to find their way back to competition, the Jazz just don't have that generational piece. Lowry's awesome. Shea is one of the best going right now. He hung half 100 for the first time in his NBA career. The Jazz lost their 4th straight game, this time to the Thunder, 123-114. They are at Memphis. Then they come home, I think, for 4 or 5 here in Salt Lake. So we'll do a little NBA. We'll do a little Jazz basketball. We'll bring in a good guest to talk about the trade the Jazz made and what could be next. Sean McVay came out today and said he's kind of pressuring Matt Stafford, let him know what the future is going to be. Eric Spoelstra, I'm telling you, my man's over the Jimmy Butler thing, you can tell. And we'll get to the latest in the NFL coaching carousel and get you ready for some NFL action coming up this weekend. The college football power brokers have been meeting over the past few days, week or so, in Atlanta. Some takeaways from those meetings, what could be next as far as changes to the landscape of college football. So we'll get to some of that on the show today. Our first guest, live in studio, will be none other than Ken Pomeroy. Now, Ken Pomeroy, in my opinion, is the North Star you should follow if you want to learn about college basketball. And as we inch closer and closer to spring, as we inch closer to March, which sounds really good right now, Ken's a guy you're going to want to read, listen to, help you fill out your bracket. Where's Utah? Where's BYU? Where's Utah State? As they bounce back from their only loss, they got to win over Nevada. So we'll bring Ken Pom in studio today. When the Department of Education handed down the quote-unquote guidance about Title IX and player compensation, Amy Donaldson was the first guest I thought of, so she'll roll by today to help us understand a little bit about what's next in the world of college athletics. Tim McMahon joins the show, covers the NBA for ESPN, covers the Utah Jazz as well. Going to have a very special guest live in studio. If you are like me and you like to golf when the weather is warm, and you like to golf a lot when the weather is warm, or maybe you like to hike and you are exposed to the sun quite a bit, we're going to do a service for you today because you need to get checked because early detection for skin cancer can save your life. So my buddy Jason Hadley from Hadley Dermatology will stop by. We're also going to do a little sports court on a Thursday afternoon, but a ton to do. Ken Pomeroy, Amy Donaldson, Tim McMahon, me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners. Happy Thursday. You're almost to your weekend. And that guy, Porter Larson, on a Thursday afternoon, I had a little PTSD watching Utah basketball play Houston because it reminded me when we would traverse up north to try to play Hartford Public or Bridgeport Central, and you couldn't get a shot off. At one point, I think the Utes had 13 turnovers and 4 made baskets. Gabe Madsen led the Utes with 8 points. That was rough, man. Not going to lie. I don't know if that's a commentary on Utah or just Houston being potentially a national championship contending team.
Got to be both, I guess, right? The Utes obviously aren't in a great place. They've won now 3 of their last 4 games in the Big 12, which we do need to give them credit for. But when you see them matched up with the class of the Big 12, man, there's a big gap there. Now, to be clear, I think that Houston is, although they're ranked number 7 in the country, I think that's a low ranking for where they sit. They haven't lost a game, I think, since like Thanksgiving. So that's a really good basketball team playing really good basketball. And we talked about it before the end of the show yesterday. Utah keeping it close would have been a win in a lot of ways. But it's a commentary on both. I'll just leave it at that for now.
I got a text message during the game last night from a friend who listened, and he reminded me that I said if they stay within 20, that's a win. They very much did not.
Well, there you go.
We try to set expectations. So Ken Pom live in studio today. We'll do some good college basketball with Ken Pom. But before Ken stops by on a Thursday, courtesy of our good friends and your good friends too, at Standard Restaurant Supply, it's your one-stop shop for all your tailgate needs online or their convenient Salt Lake City location. On a Thursday, it's time now for your opening tip. All right, Porter, I want you to stay on the mic for this segment because I read something today. I get these emails from PR companies that poll the sports fans across the country to get an idea of which team which team is being cheered for the most in which state, I guess is how I'll say that. So who does the state of Utah want to win the Super Bowl? Who does America want to win the NFC Championship, AFC Championship? And according to the data, over 2/3 of Americans want the Bills to beat the Chiefs this week. And it just made me think topically about this topic when it comes to how we cheer for teams in sports and how we cheer for players and we cheer for, it's one thing to cheer for the team that that plays in the state where you grew up. I think that's the most natural tie. Most people here that like NBA basketball are Jazz fans in some way, shape, or form. Now, we don't have an NFL team, and I always find it interesting. Porter grew up with people around him that are Cowboys fans. I grew up back east going to Jets games. And if you didn't have an experience living out of state, maybe your uncle liked the Steelers. It's always interesting to hear how people chose their NFL team. I have a lot of Broncos fans here because of proximity. The Raiders are super close now. Steve Young was awesome for the Niners. That inspired a generation of Niner fans. But it's this thing, and I don't know that I have an answer for it. I don't know why we do this. And it's not just a sports thing. I think it's a celebrity thing. I think it's a politics thing. We tend to love you until we don't, right? Because the Kansas City Chiefs, with Patrick Mahomes they draft Mahomes. He's sitting behind Alex. And you hear all this stuff about, man, that Alex Smith's backup, this Mahomes kid is really, really special. Then he gets the job. And then he was the NFL Steph Curry. The way Steph Curry captured the last time the NBA had super healthy ratings was when Steph was starting to Steph. And he was kind of like this answer to LeBron. LeBron's a polarizing figure. You got to respect what he's done in pro basketball, but every time you turn on ESPN, their lead is a LeBron James dunk at the age of 40, and they play a frickin' siren, and they go crazy, and it gets really, really annoying. So LeBron was in the midst of, like, and people that covered the league would say, I feel like LeBron is starting out this generationally special run where he's probably going to be a part of like 10 or 12 finals, and he has been, and he might win every single time he gets to the finals because as he evolved, the gap between LeBron and whoever was number 2, and I always thought it was Durant, but there was a Grand Canyon-sized gap between peak LeBron and peak Durant. Steph kind of came along and was kind of like the answer to LeBron, and the Warriors were super fun to watch, and Mahomes was like that with the Chiefs, and they were winning games and winning Super Bowls. But we love you until we don't in this country, and we've experienced it in the state as well. I'll present Donovan Mitchell as example number 1 of a recent player that it seemed. Now, I always loved him because I thought he was awesome. I didn't love the way he handled the end at the Jazz because there was nobody more responsible. No matter what he says front-facing now, behind the scenes with that Jazz team, nobody was more responsible with them being broken down brick by brick than Donovan. Now, Danny made the decision, but Donovan was responsible for it because he became a guy that didn't want to live here. He was a bit of a malcontent, and even though he was awesome, he was going to leave. And so every time he gives an interview of like, oh, we had so much more left with that Utah team, I'm like, dude, don't. Okay, save it. But Porter, why do we do this thing as sports fans where we simply love you until we don't? Is it the Taylor Swift thing? Is it because the Chiefs have won so much? Like the majority of Americans, according to the data, they're over this Chiefs stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's got to be something deeper than just football fandom here, because it does go to a cultural level where you love to see people win until they win a lot and more and then more, and then you get bored of seeing them win, right? And then you want to see them lose, and then when they keep winning, it pisses you off to see them win. So there's something to it where it's not just. I mean, think of the New England Patriots. No one cared about the New England Patriots in 1995 as far as a national perspective goes. And now, I mean, they are as hated, as loved in a lot of ways as the Dallas Cowboys, who were America's team 15 years ago, right? It's something where the culture will shift, but whoever is on top is going to receive, of course, plenty of fandom, plenty of cheers, but they're going to receive the hate too, because all of the other 29, 30, whatever the league you want to look at, every other one of those teams has a bunch of fans who are now waiting 2, 3, maybe 4 years watching one team win a championship year after year. And there's just something visceral to that if you're a fan of one of the other teams.
I thought it was interesting when I read that today. And yes, there's been a lot of pushback to the Taylor Swift thing. We do not subscribe to that theory on this show. I think it's odd that people get upset about it. Maybe it is just that they're winning. Mahomes seems like a likable guy. I think Kelsey seems like a likable dude. And, of course, Andy Reid, former BYU player, as their head coach. Doesn't get much better than Andy. So I thought that was interesting. It kind of made me think about the way we just simply support teams and players, and then suddenly we just decide we're out on them for whatever reason. When it comes to winning at a high level in pro sports, it's so hard to do. I tend to respect teams that can build dynasties besides the Patriots because I'm a Jets fan and I can be petty. But it's hard to win. Certainly hard to win Super Bowls. Nobody's ever done it 3 straight, and I kind of would like history to be made. I'd like to see that in Kansas City. All right, Ken Pomeroy is going to join us coming up live in studio. Time now for our PGA Tour leaderboard from our friends at Uinta Golf. They're doing a special on Callaway, the future of performance, AI smart face iron. So check them out with our good friends over at Uinta. The weather will turn in the next 6-7 weeks, so golf season will be here. It is round 2 of the Farmers Insurance Open live at Torrey Pines. Today, I believe they're on the North Course. This is the second round. And Ludwig Aberg, who is just awesome, is leading the way at 7 under par. Hayden Springer follows him at 6 under. And how about Joel Damon of Netflix fame? He's at 5 under, as is Lanto Griffin. Luke Clanton, who's an amateur golfer, is at 5 under par as well. So there you go. There's our leaderboard. We'll kind of keep you up to date. Local boy Zach Blair is tied for 26th at 4 under, but he's off to a bad start today, 4 over. So our friends at You Into Golf bring you the PGA Tour leaderboard. So check out their special on Callaway. All right, busy show today on a Thursday. Ken Palmer is going to join us coming up on the other side. We'll do some college basketball. BYU got a massive win at Colorado. It was a must-win. They were down 10 in the first half, and then they really ran away. Pretty impressive shot making, pretty impressive playmaking. Utah had won 3 straight games, and then they went and faced a very, very good Houston team, and it did not go well. But Utah is going to be back at home taking on Baylor, the Baylor Bears, Saturday at 2:30. I'll repeat what I said earlier. Craig Smith in his comments after the game, fans impact winning. So let's see if we can pack that building because we've got a couple of home games before the Utes go back out on the road. It's home on Saturday against Baylor, and I think it's Tuesday of next week against Cincinnati before they're on the road at OK State. So Ken Pomeroy coming up next. Amy Donaldson stops by. We'll bring in Tim McMahon for a little bit of NBA, and then we'll get you ready for the NFL championship games coming up on Sunday. You can hear both of them right here. It is The Drive on a Thursday afternoon. It's good to have you with us right here on ESPN 700. I've got a goal today that I'm going to be nice. I'm going to be kind, not just on the show, but in life. We're giving away Shinedown tickets. Hey, if Shinedown's your thing, I'm not mad at you, okay? It's a great thing about art. It's a great thing about music. So, Porter, what we've decided to do on the show today, we're going to alternate, okay? So, I went first. That's Train, Meet Virginia. And so what we're going to do is we're going to play songs that we perceive to be horrible, but people obviously like because they sell records.
What if I told you I've been to a Shinedown concert?
I wouldn't be surprised. and, you know, I've got to admit, I was at a music festival once where Train performed.
Yeah.
So you know.
There we go.
There's a great Family Guy bit about Train. We might be able to play it on the show if you can look that up at some point.
A Family Guy bit on the show.
Yeah, it's Brian and Peter in the car, and Train comes on. It's like, hey, should we change it? And then they're like, yeah, whatever, if you want to. Turn it up, and they start jamming. So
Okay.
it's really funny.
I remember that.
Nobody gives a rip about that, but people give a rip about college basketball. And sitting across from me is my North Star for college hoops. His name is Ken Pomeroy. Ken Pomeroy live in studio. Happy Thursday, man. How we doing?
Hey, Spence. I'm doing great. Great to be back on the show. Must mean that college hoops is starting to matter again. So it seems like it's later and later every year that it gets its proper attention. But here we are.
You know, it matters to me, but it just doesn't matter to people the way it did when you and I were growing up watching those. Because college basketball, you and I are close to the same age. I mean, you know, late 80s into the 90s, and the ratings were sky high. I don't know how much of it had to do with players hung around 2, 3, 4 years or whatever. I don't know how much of it had to do with what I perceived to be not relatable, but superstars that you knew. You know, those Vegas teams with LJ and Augman, and the Duke teams with Hurley and Leitner, and that's in a vacuum, right? But why do you think college basketball has kind of dropped out of the consciousness of the average sports fan until right about now?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it has more to do with just there's more stuff going on, right? Like there's just more stuff for people to do. Football season is, you know, football's always, you know, it's been king. It's always been king for decades now. And as that trend has continued, you know, you got the college football playoff pushing later and later into January. You got the NFL pushing later and later, expanding their season. So I think that just eats into you know, the interest in college basketball. I do think you know, obviously the storylines you're talking about were pretty classic, and it's hard to develop those now when players are, you know, not staying more than 2 or 3 years at their given school. So, you know, that could be a factor as well. But the amazing thing is, like, the game is, as it's being played, is like as good. The product is as good as it's ever been. You know, in terms of like players making shots and offensive performance this year is really better than it's ever been. College basketball finally got around to mostly outlawing the secondary defender charge, which has made the game much better. So the product on the court is still very, very good. And if you're a true hoop head like yourself and myself, you know, you watch a high level game, you know, among the best teams in the country, like it's still a tremendous product.
No doubt. Let's stay in the space for a moment, because I went up to the Utah BYU game. First of all, atmosphere was awesome. The first time for me that it felt like it did when I was in school in the late 90s when Rick was the coach. But I do think there are some changes that the game could benefit from. Before I offer my take, what's the Ken Pomeroy take on maybe some tweaks or changes college basketball needs to look at?
Yeah, I could go through a whole list. Some
I want the whole list.
You want
buddy.
the whole list?
I want the whole list.
Well, I mean, the number one thing is fixing the end game. The last minute or two of each game is just takes too long.
It does.
The review process, you know, the college model, which I think is the same as it is in football, is basically essentially unlimited challenges. Like, you know, players and coaches, they can twirl their finger on any play, and officials in the last 2 minutes feel like they are duty bound to go to the monitor and review it. And even more than that, there's no really time limit on how long the reviews take. So if they need 3 or 4 or 5 minutes to look at every single angle and adjudicate something, they will do that. And that just kills the excitement that you know, it should be the most exciting part of the game, and it ends up being just very difficult to watch. So fix that first. You know, we can veer towards an NBA model on that front.
Okay, we got the end of game changes, and the challenges drive me nuts. What about? Can we move to 6 fouls? What do you think about moving to 6 fouls?
Don't like it.
You don't like it. Okay.
Here's why. First of all, we're actually in an era of college basketball. This is one of the reasons why the product is so great. We're actually in an era of college basketball where free throws or fouls are almost at an all-time low.
Okay.
So there are fewer foul outs than there ever have been. Certainly seeing star players get in foul trouble early in the game and stuff like that is not a great aspect of the game.
Mm-hmm.
I would feel more strongly about no 6 fouls if like the game could be officiated perfectly. The worst part is when a player picks up his, third foul in the first half or whatever, or second foul even, and it's a bad call, and you're like, this is not fair.
Mm-hmm.
But I go back to, there was a time where we had 6 fouls in college basketball. I don't know if you remember this, Spence, but I imagine you do.
Honestly don't.
You do not?
I
Okay.
honestly don't.
Well, I'm surprised.
That's my bad.
I might be a little older than you then, but late 80s, people are having the same debate. Big East was king of college basketball. You had all these special big men battling it out in the Big East, and guys were fouling out. And so the Big East decided to experiment with 6 fouls. And what happened was you just ended up with more fouls. Guys played more physical, right? Because they knew that they had that extra foul they could use.
Okay.
So fouls went up by like 3 a game, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's something. And ultimately the experiment was abandoned after like 3 years. So I think you'd see the same thing. I think you just see more fouls, and I'm more against more fouls than I am worried about, some big man having to sit with 2 fouls in the first half.
Shot clock.
Shot clock, I am pro going to 24 seconds.
Okay, good.
Yes,
Me too.
let's do it.
Yeah.
I mean, if 16-year-olds in Belgium can play with a 24-second shot clock, why can't kids in America? We invented the game, Spence.
Right.
Like, props to us, right? We should be playing with the 24-second shot clock. We shouldn't have these soft rules. So,
anything else that pops and I would imagine a smart guy like you has 70 other things, but anything else that normal college basketball fans can relate to?
How do you feel about quarters, Spence?
I like quarters.
Yes, I think men's college basketball, as far as I know, is the only level of college basketball anywhere in the world that plays with halves. It does not play with quarters.
Yeah.
Like the women are playing with quarters.
Yep.
Everywhere in the rest of the world is playing with quarters. It also, by the way, would have the side effect of further reducing free throw attempts because you'd get rid of, you'd reset the foul count, right, the bonus count at the end of the quarter. So there'd be fewer fouls or you'd be shooting on. So it would just make the game flow that much better. So, I mean, to me, the quarters thing is like the ultimate example of the men's basketball hierarchy, whatever it is, just being way too slow to adjust and way too fixated on this idea that our game has to be unique. This is why people like nobody's watching men's college basketball because you don't have quarters. There's zero people who care about that. I mean, some people will say that. Like you will run into some fans who'll be like, "Oh yeah, I actually like it. It makes it unique." But honestly, if you switch to quarters, nobody would care, and the game would flow better. You'd have fewer free throws. It would just be better.
Totally agree. Gives coaches a chance to adjust a little bit, kind of an additional break.
Yes.
Why don't we reset fouls at the end of regulation in overtime?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea as well. Hadn't thought of that.
Well, Utah, BYU, they were both in the bonus.
Yeah.
Overtime, and Lawson gets fouled off the ball, and he's going to shoot free throw. I'm like, reset it.
Right.
Although,
why was Lawson on the court?
okay.
Have we talked about that one?
We haven't, but we will.
Okay.
Let's get into it.
Yeah.
So Ken Pomeroy live in studio. Before we get into anything in a vacuum, I want to start with the Utah men. And, they just won 3 straight Big 12 games. The preseason didn't really have a ton of challenges. The ones that they did have, they didn't live up to. They're 11-7. They're 3-4 in Big 12 play. What does your data say about whether or not this team is improved and what they could potentially do this year from a macro standpoint?
Right. So I had them preseason 82, and they're currently 84. So basically going as expected, which, isn't terribly surprising. Obviously, it's just been a huge challenge to get talent and retain talent there. And the Big 12, while it's a good move, I would say, for the football program, for the basketball program, it's just really difficult. It's really difficult to compete in such a large conference and not really have an identity. And I thought nothing illustrated that better than what happened yesterday against Houston, where really from the first minute of the game, it was pretty apparent there was a wide gap in ability between those two teams. And obviously Houston's on another level, and it's kind of foolish to suggest that Utah could ever get to that level necessarily. But the fact that there's such a huge gap is really frustrating. It almost, I hate to say it, but it almost makes me long for the days where Utah was in the Mountain West. Because if they were in the Mountain West, like they'd have a winning record. They'd be competing for conference titles. And I think from a basketball standpoint, it'd be more interesting. I understand from a football standpoint, it definitely would not, but from a basketball standpoint, it would be.
That game was anxiety-inducing. Okay, so 4 o'clock, we end the show about 3:25 to get to pregame. I run home because I want to watch it. And it reminded me, Ken, because I played in the FCAC back east, as you know, and the FCAC has this weird little dichotomy where I played at New Canaan High School. So if we were playing other future hedge fund managers, we were fine. Darien, Wilton, Greenwich. We could play with them and beat them, Wilton, more often. And then we'd go up north. And my freshman year, we played Hartford Public, and their center was Marcus Camby. And at halftime, it was 47-10. And our team manager rocked up to me. He said, "Hey, are they switching on the screens?" I said, "I don't know. It's 47-10. And I'm bringing it up because we could not get a shot off. Like, when you play competition that's like that, I think at one point last night, Utah had 12 turnovers and 4 baskets. Like, they could not even get looks. Gabe Madsen was their leading scorer with 8. They scored 36 points. Was last night more of a, oh, my gosh, Houston is this, or, uh-oh, Utah is that?
Yeah, they went deep into that game, I think, with more turnovers than points. It was like, it was something ridiculous, like 18-17 or something in terms of turnovers and points at one point. But, so first of all, they got Houston's best shot. I mean, Houston did almost lose to UCF the game before. So they certainly got Houston's best shot. But I guess the point is Houston's best shot is a really, really, really good and something that currently is unattainable for the Utah men's basketball program. And I don't think that Utah really gave its best shot either. I mean, we should point out, like, the reason I just bring up it's tough to be in the Big 12 is because Utah I do have them ranked 84th. That's not like the bottom has dropped out of the program. You know, you look at some teams in the ACC and, those programs are in disarray. Tony Bennett leaves Virginia, and Virginia is, well outside the top 100 right now. Jim Larinaga leaves Miami. Miami's dropping out of the top 200. So Utah's still a competent program. It's just that they're in one of the most difficult leagues in the country, and this is what you get. Anything sniffing a 500 record would be a pretty amazing accomplishment. But at the same time, you just feel like you're so far away from doing anything exciting in this league, and that's the frustrating part of it.
All right, so for our listeners, our Utah fan listeners, they should celebrate the fact that they are 84.
Well,
Porter, can we get a promo going on the station that Utah men's basketball, according to Ken Pomeroy, is 84, and that's not a bad thing?
Yeah, I'm rolling.
Give us a little more context there, because I don't think that's going to land well with people that don't understand exactly what you're saying.
Right. Yeah, and I think you're mischaracterizing what I'm trying to say a little bit.
And, of course, I'm being facetious because I can be a pain in the ass, Ken. You know this by now.
But I guess the point is they're close to when you think about the future of the program, like, obviously there's going to be thoughts about, hey, what's the future of the program right now? What should we do with the head coach? And they're close to being competent. Obviously, competent is not the goal in the Big 12. But if you're the 40th ranked team in the Big 12, you're still going to lose a bunch of games. You're probably going to get into the tournament still. And that's kind of, I mean, I don't know what we see as like success for this program. Like, but to me, it's like getting to the tournament 2 out of 5 years or something. Like, you're not going to get there. You're probably not going to get there every year. Now, having said that, the contrarian would say, hey, look at Houston, a team that, you might remember Phi Sama Jama.
I do remember that.
Yeah. After about the late 80s to about the early 2010s, like, the Houston program was kind of garbage. Like, they would have been happy to have the kind of season Utah's having right now. And then they hire Kelvin Sampson, and all of a sudden they're like one of the best teams in the country year after year. And so you see a situation like that, and you think, well, that could be us, like, in the right circumstances, and it could be, but it's a little unrealistic. But I don't know. It's a long-winded way of saying that obviously fans should not be satisfied with where the program is at right now. But that said, I don't think things are as bad as you might think by simply looking at that Houston game. That was pretty awful.
Fair enough. Close to being competent will be the name of my memoir that I write before I die in my 80s or 90s. I'm teasing you, of course. I understand the sentiment of what you're saying. It's just because I like Craig a lot, Ken, and he's won wherever he's been. And, of course, as you pointed out, when the results aren't necessarily what the community or the athletic department want to see, people are going to ask questions about him. I view this far more as a talent issue, but of course, when you're the head coach, you've got to wear that too. What's fair to say about Craig Smith?
So I guess the first thing is, when Utah hired Craig Smith, like, it totally seemed like the right hire, right? I don't recall anybody criticizing it. I mean, it was just the obvious hire.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Like, when you make the right hire and things aren't going well, there may be deeper questions to ask about how does the program succeed going forward. I guess the other thing is, hey, okay, so who's out there that you want, that you think you can get? That's another challenge. Obviously, Craig's like, super nice guy and a great representative of the program, and so somebody like that, you kind of want to root for and you hope that he succeeds. Obviously, the results aren't, the results eventually catch up to you, and eventually you'll have to make a change. But seriously, like who's coming into this program right now? That was the whole reason Craig was the obvious choice. He was local, he had success, and he just made sense. I mean, you're really looking at like mid-major head coaches, kind of like Utah State does, to come in here and take over the program. And so you're not going to necessarily get this sexy name that's going to attract talent or attract dollars to the program. And that's ultimately, those are things you need to do to somehow, rise above the situation they're in right now.
Well, and to stay in this space for a moment, I mean, this, when somebody tastes the charter food plane in the NBA and they stay in those 5-star hotels in the NBA, they don't want to leave pro basketball. Now, it's changed a little bit because recruiting has changed a little bit in college, where maybe you don't have to land in Des Moines and drive 7 hours to go see a random prospect all the time, but it's a different grind. And so a lot of people in the market said, go get Johnny Bryant. I'm like, Johnny's not leaving his gig. Johnny might be an NBA coach in the next 2 or 3 years, or go get Alex Smith, right? And Alex is now in Dallas, is one of the assistants down there. It's pretty rare that a guy will willingly leave pro basketball to go back to college, yeah?
Yeah, and I will be a little snarky here because you did say Alex Smith and you meant Alex Jensen.
Oh, whoops.
But Alex Smith would be a hell of a hire as well.
I actually have Alex Smith notes because we're doing a segment on Patrick Mahomes. But yes, Alex Jensen, who's now in Dallas. Look, I dish the snark. I can take the snark. But you get the sentiment, right? Guys just don't necessarily leave the pros to go back to college.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it'd be. I don't want to dissuade either of those gentlemen from coming here if the need arises. But obviously, yeah, their life is a little more stable than it would be to come here, and it would just be a massive challenge for either of them compared to what they're dealing with right now.
So year one for Craig, 11-20, 4-6 in the Pac-12. Year two, 17-15, 10-10 in the Pac-12. Year three, 22-15, 9-11 in the Pac, tied for 6th. They did go to the NIT. This year, like I said, 11-7, 3-4 in conference. Are you seeing growth? Are you seeing improvement? Or is that hard to do in this modern day and age of college basketball? Like Davon was awesome. Be nice to have Davon again this year. He's in St. John's, right? So do you have to analyze everything in a vacuum now, or can you look at a 30,000-foot view and say, yeah, it's getting a little bit better step by step?
No, I think it's hard to say it's getting a little bit better.
Okay.
You're right. There's no real evidence of that. I mean, the Davon situation is like the perfect example here where, Craig did a great job finding a tremendous talent. Mm-hmm. And then as we get into the NIT, I mean, he's basically openly auditioning his services for the highest bidder, right, for the next season. I mean, he's not making any secret about that during the NIT run. And so that's kind of what a program at Utah's level right now has to deal with. And it's extremely difficult to, rise up the food chain in those situations. You have to be very good in terms of bringing in transfers and dealing with the transfer portal. And, Craig just hasn't hit. I mean, Kevaketa, by the way, another great example, right? Like he decides he wants a better situation and he ends up in a better situation. And that, obviously leaves Utah with a bit of a hole in the middle.
All right, let's we'll do BYU Utah in a vacuum, then kind of pan out and do BYU big picture before we catch a break. In the next segment, for listeners who are curious, Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, etc. Okay, we'll get you excited for what the Jazz could potentially look at if Lady Luck finally shines on them in a way that it never has. 9 lottery trips, they've never moved up, which means we're due. Okay, so I referenced I was in the building. Pops was in town. It was fun to watch the game with him. My brother was there. BYU fans on one side, Utah fans on the other, because, of course, I went to Utah in the late 90s. And as I referenced, atmosphere, awesome. And I'll repeat what I said earlier. Get to the Baylor game on Saturday at 2:30. Craig himself, after the game, said fans impact winning. If you want this program to get better, the one thing you can do is show up so you can give Craig some tools to recruit. But your overall thoughts on what you saw, Utah getting that win in overtime, 73-72.
Yeah, it was an impressive game. This is the deal with the Big 12, by the way. This is the deal with Utah. I'll just, give a pitch from them being 84th. That's actually good enough to be really competitive with the better teams in the league. So anybody that comes into the Huntsman Center, like, Utah's capable of beating. Like, yeah, they go on the road. They're going to struggle with the Houstons and the Iowa States of the world. But at home, they can beat a BYU. I think people were surprised maybe that, the gambling interests out there basically had that game as a coin flip, and it turned out
You nailed it. You said Utes by 1.
I said Utes by 1, Spence. Yes.
Listen to Ken Pomeroy. Do you want to win money when you fill out your bracket? Listen to Ken Pomeroy.
Right. So that's the deal, though. Like, Baylor's coming in here, and Baylor's obviously a brand name, but very beatable. Anyway, I think that's the takeaway from the Utah BYU game is that Utah can compete with certainly the middle teams in the league at home, and that ultimately makes the Big 12 experience pretty exciting. Obviously, just competing is not enough; you have to win, and they were able to make some big plays down the stretch. Certainly, I thought made their life a little more difficult by Craig's curious decision to leave Lawson and Lovering on the floor there in late moments. I believe of regulation, was it, where Kevin Young decided to pull the hack-a-shack from the NBA playbook and had some success in engineering an extra period out of that.
Do you think that was, and there's no way of knowing unless Craig tells us himself, do you think that was, I'm going to be stubborn and Kevin's not going to get one over on me? Do you think it's like, okay, I want Lawson to know I believe in him? Right. Because you're right, and I'm screaming. I'm like, dude, he's got to sit. Because his free throws that night, you're like, just hit the rim and maybe we can get the board. Like, why do you think he left him in?
No idea. I mean, I think there's part of that, right? There's part of it. Hey, I'm just going to show confidence in this guy. I'm going to believe in him. If he makes these free throws, it'll give him confidence. Maybe there's something to that, but certainly a risky decision for a guy who's a sub 50% free throw shooter in his life. And he's also one of those guys. I don't know if you ever watch games, Spencer, where like sometimes there'll be a bad free throw shooter at the line, and he'll make a free throw. And the analyst on the game will be like, "Oh, that shot looks really good. That looks really. I don't understand why he's a bad free throw shooter.
Yeah. Aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, it looks good. And,
fundamentally sound.
I feel the same way about Lawson Lovering. Like his free throw, he looks good. Like he actually looks confident at the line when he's shooting. But the long-term results would suggest that in a close game, you might need to hide him for a couple of possessions.
Yeah, it's like I remember when Jazz fans would say, "Hey, Ronnie Brewer's going to figure it out from three." I'm like, "No, he's not." Because I think he broke his arm, right?
Yeah.
He could never fully get the elbow in, and sweet kid, good player, but was never going to figure it out from three. All right, I saw Craig at the Utah BYU football game. On the sidelines, he was doing the whole hey, there's a lot of people here, so while I have your ear, come watch the basketball team. It happens all the time. And he talked to me about Ezra. Ezra Asar said, you're going to like him. And some personal stuff, death in the family. He struggled against Houston because they have size and athletes, but BYU couldn't do anything with him.
Right.
The only player who actually had a little bit of success was Kaba, but he took it to Foose, and Kevin tried a bunch of different things, and I didn't know he had it in him. I mean, I was really impressed. What stood out?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing with Craig. Like he is able to find guys. Like he obviously found Ezra out the transfer portal, and he's been a stud for Utah. And if he could find like 2 or 3 more Ezras, then we're talking. Now we're talking tournament bid. But obviously, unfortunately, he doesn't have a ton of help. But I do enjoy watching him play. And obviously, that BYU game, he really took that game over, and it was very impressive.
Who on Utah's roster, in your opinion? Because I referenced Davon, and before Davon started playing for Craig, I said the same thing. Like, who's the ball in hand initiator? Who's the offense is breaking down? Go get a shot. Go make a play. It's not Gabe. Gabe's a little bit like Markkanen, right? Like, he's not a throw it 1-4 flat ISO player, but he's a knockdown shooter. Who's the ball in hand guy? Who's the offense initiator on this roster? Is there one on the roster?
Yeah, they don't really have one. I mean, Sharev Jams is a fun guy to watch, and he has some ability to dribble and set up guys, and has some size. He's just a really unique player, and he is a fun guy to watch. But he's definitely not a guy who is going to get his own shot. He's going to set up other guys. I mean, they don't really have the guy who shot clock winding down can create their own thing. Other than Ezra, like he does have some of that ability, but it's mostly a team of role players that kind of mesh together, and as well as you could expect. But it's they certainly struggle to find guys who can just make stuff happen when the defense is taking away your first and second option.
So let's before we catch a break, we'll do some prospects with Ken coming up next. But BYU, from a macro standpoint, they had to have that Colorado game. They went down 10 in the first half, and it's like, oh my goodness, maybe it's real that they're going to struggle, even though they have reportedly a 7-figure NIL deal for Yegor Demon, reportedly a lot of money for Cannon Catchings, who a lot of people love as a pro. I don't see it from him yet. I like the length. I like the measurables. You get why pro scouts like him, but every time I watch him play, it seems like he comes in and jacks up threes. But right now, BYU, they find themselves at 3-4 in conference, 12-6 overall. When they go, Ken, you can see the talent. You can see why, a lot of people think highly of them. What does your data say about where they're at right now and what you think they can be the rest of the Big 12 season?
Yeah, I'm 38th right now. So, even though they're sitting there with the same Big 12 record as Utah, there's a little more juice to this team, and we saw it against Colorado. That's a team that if you have tournament aspirations, you should handle them easily, and they have, and they did. But it also was their first road win of the year, and they're going to be needing more of those to make the tournament. So, right now it's the team that, is just right on the edge, really, I think, in terms of their prospects for getting into the tournament. You look at a lot of mock brackets; they're not. I don't think anybody really has them in there right now, but they can get there. And you mentioned obviously Demon is a real talent, able to contribute now, and a guy that has tremendous vision and just really has to I think the next piece is executing on that vision, because he does he'll see things and he just will not make a great pass or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned catchings, and catchings right now is basically a catch and shoot guy, and that might work to BYU's favor. You might get Cannon catchings for another season and see that development. And overall, though, it's a much more experienced team, and a team that has been together longer, and you see that connectivity. And I think there's definitely a little more hope for BYU's tournament prospects.
All right, coming up next, we'll get Ken's take on some of these draft prospects, including A.J. DeBanza, who will not be in the draft, but will play for BYU next year. But we'll talk Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, etc., for Jazz fans wondering why the Jazz are doing what they're doing. But time now for the PGA Tour leaderboard from You Into Golf. They're doing a special on the new Callaway line, which is the future of performance with AI smart face irons. Great, AIs in golf. Ludwig Aberg continues to lead. This kid has all sorts of game at 7 under. This is the Farmers Insurance Open at Torrey Pines. I think they're on the North Course today. Hayden Springer, 6 under. Luke Clanton, who is an amateur, is at 6 under as well. Joel Damon of Netflix fame, 5 under par, as is Lanto Griffin and K.H. Lee. The local product, oh dear. Zach had a rough, okay, Zach's all the way down to 33. He's 5 over today, unfortunately. So the Farmers Insurance Open going on at Torrey Pines. More with Ken Pomeroy coming up next right here on ESPN 700. This is so good by you. I did not know where you were going. So if you're just tuning in honor of a giveaway we're doing on the station, we're not judging any of you. We're not judging you, any of you. But our bumps today are songs that we think are horrible, but a lot of people. Was that Imagine Dragons?
It was.
Why do
I
I
just
feel
can't.
like
I just can't do it.
Why do I feel like BYU basketball probably warms up to Imagine Dragons?
I think there is isn't there a connection with the
Yeah, the dudes from
Utah?
Provo.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
They're so bad.
But yeah, it's the sound to me is just it's unbearable. But they're popular, and I know that. Well, even stations in this building play a lot of Imagine Dragons.
They're not good. My brother got home from his mission. He's like, "Dude, I heard a new band." Like, don't just.
Oh no!
You just got home. Okay, give yourself a little while. You'll get out of it. Ken Pomeroy live in studio. Ken, is there a band that comes to mind that you don't like that everybody else seems to like? Let's get his mic on. There, try again. There you go.
I was afraid you're going to come at me with that, but back in the day, it was Nickelback.
Oh, it's still very much Nickelback.
All right, well, then let's go with them. Yeah.
Okay, we'll do a little Nickelback track coming up next. Ken Pomeroy's live in studio doing some college basketball. All right, Ken. The one question that I get more than any other question, if I'm talking to friends who love basketball or getting feedback from listeners, is what the hell are the Jazz doing? And when are they going to be good again? And the truth is nobody knows. I mean, the Sam Hinkie Philadelphia process, it took 5 years for them to land Embiid. And have they won a championship? No. But Embiid was kind of like the prize of the process. Okay, now we have a generational piece. And the easy thing to say is the Jazz are doing this because Cooper Flagg seems to be available, and a front court of Walker Kessler, Larry Market, and Cooper Flagg would be very popular around here for several reasons. But tell us about Cooper Flagg, the type of player he is, and what Jazz fans need to know about, hopefully, a future Jazz man.
Yeah, Cooper Flagg checks all the boxes as a player. He's a 6'9", 18-year-old that can dribble, can basically score from all three levels. Figures to be an impact defender at the next level. It can guard different positions. Like, his footwork is incredible, not even considering how inexperienced he is. It's just he's got really good footwork. He moves really well. Great touch. He checks all the boxes, and he's very young, and he's probably going to be the National Player of the Year this year. As a young freshman on a team that may be the best team in the country in Duke. Like, we're in an era where college basketball is getting older. We talk about how good the product is, and it's partly due to the fact that college basketball has gotten older the last few years since the extra COVID year, and there really hasn't been a place for the impact freshman over that time. And yet Cooper Flagg has found a place for himself, and is living up to all of the hype that was heaped on him at the beginning of the season, and then some.
So when Victor Wembanyama was available, it seemed like draft analysts who wanted to be different, or zig when everybody else zagged, was like, hey, but watch out for the Scoot Henderson kid. And, it's like, wait a second. Thank you for your take, but it seemed like everybody knew that Wembanyama was going to be different, generational, and it still blows my mind watching him play basketball. Is there a player in this draft that is close to Cooper Flagg? Or if anybody who says there is, are they just overthinking it? Is this just like Cooper and everybody else?
Yeah, it's funny because I remember there was like that 1 week, I think, in December or something of the Wembanyama year where, somebody was like,
watch out for Scoot.
It's not a done deal. He's going to be number one. It could be Scoot. And looking back on that, it's pretty hilarious. Yeah. There's really no challenger for Cooper. The next guy on the list is probably Dylan Harper at Rutgers, who has had an amazing year himself, like a really good year for a freshman. Handles the offense for Rutgers, plays along with Ace Bailey, who's kind of a rangy 6'10" big, who is also going to go probably top 5 in the draft. I did want to point out, I just noticed this. We're talking about, I'm trying to make the case for Utah at 84 being somewhat meaningful. Rutgers has 2 potential top 5 picks. Rutgers is ranked 85 in my rating, so Utah's ranked ahead of a team with 2 top 5 picks. Just want to point that out.
I didn't mean to hurt your feelings.
Who's mocking me for defending that.
No. I understood your point. But if there are listeners that don't know what you do and they're like, "Hey, this dude on the radio said the Utes are 84, and he said it's kind of good," I just wanted you to clarify.
No, we're good. We're good. I thought that was funny. Yeah,
Rutgers are 3-5 in conference. They're 10-9 overall. They're not going to make the tournament, Ken.
Right. They're not going to make. Yeah, very unlikely to make the tournament unless they get on a heater here. Mm-hmm. And the deal is, like, Dylan Harper is actually a really good college player, really productive. Ace Bailey has had his moments. He's actually had some really nice games lately. He's still kind of in the development phase. And after that, the talent drops off on that team, quite a bit. So there's just no help there. But those two players themselves should be excellent future pros.
So Gavoni's latest draft has Yegor at 9, Yegor Demet at number 9. The previous rank was 7. I mean, look, these things are just simply content. And you can see why pro scouts like him. Simply, I mean, he's so long, he's so big, and he does have a really nice feel. And he's young. Certainly he'll have to, improve on his shooting. He'll have to improve on his physicality. But when you watch him play, you're like, yeah, I can see why pro scouts like him. Do you think he's a top 10 pro prospect in this draft?
Yeah, I think so. One of the deal he was. I mean, I've seen him ranked higher in drafts, and then he had that, I guess, ankle injury, and coming out of that, he had a couple of pretty bad games, which I think might have caused people to maybe reconsider. Once you get past the top 2 or 3 guys, like the evaluations of those next, 4 through 15 or whatever are always pretty close, and there's going to be a lot of movement there. But certainly as a playmaker, as a freshman at the level he's playing at, with his size, I mean, those are things that are just naturally going to, catch the eye of anyone who's, building a professional team. And obviously the shooting has not come around so far this year, and people keep waiting for it. And every time he goes like 2 for 5 in a game, people are like, oh, he's got it. That's it. He's back. The slump's over. But he's struggling from the shooting standpoint. And you look at his free throw shooting as well, it's not very good. So that doesn't portend for necessarily a great natural shooter. But if that piece ever comes along, obviously he's a very valuable player, and you're going to see teams take swings on that. And furthermore, like he's at least statistically made an impact defensively. He gets steals, he gets blocks, he gets deflections. So that makes him a very exciting prospect.
At one point, Cannon Catchings was a mock first-round prospect. The latest Gavoni ranking is 39. You referenced it earlier. If he doesn't get more playing time, if he doesn't show that he's ready, maybe BYU gets him back in a year. What stands out most to you about why pro prospects seem to value him very highly, even though it hasn't been great so far with BYU?
Yeah, I mean, he's another guy with like guard skills and big man dimensions, and that's always a fun combination, an enticing combination. It hasn't translated as much as it has for Yegor in terms of actual production on the court. I mean, I kind of mentioned like his offensive role right now is not entirely as a catch and shoot guy, but mostly as a catch and shoot guy. I mean, he's taken 89 threes and 53 twos and just 34 free throws. So he's really not like able to generate free throws. He's not able to initiate contact. Mostly just a shooter at this point, and not a great one at that. So that's the issue with his prospects. The tools are there, and if he wanted to make a go of a professional career after this year, the way things are set up right now, the expanded rosters and the two-way possibilities, he obviously could make a go of it. But there's going to be a discussion there. It's certainly not a done deal the way it is for Yegor.
Can Gabe Madsen make money playing basketball overseas? I mean, a big body kid who can shoot it. I don't know. I don't know that Craig has a pro. And if he does have a pro, it's probably Gabe, but it's probably Europe. Does that track with you?
Yes, that tracks with me as well. And nothing wrong with playing in Europe, by the way.
For sure. Spencer Nelson, you get a passport? Yeah. That's a good life.
Yeah, that's an excellent life. Yeah, sign me up for, roll my life back to like 23. Let me play professional basketball in like Gran Canaria for
come on.
3 or 4 years. I mean,
2 AAU teammates of mine played pro basketball in Europe for like 12 years. Yeah. Had a great life.
Yeah, it's a great life. You're exposed to different cultures. I mean, it's so it's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, there's I don't think there's really an NBA prospect on the roster there, of course. But Sharev Jams, by the way, is kind of an intriguing one as well. I know he's not super productive as a collegiate guy, but just the way he handles the ball and has court vision and his size, probably not an NBA player, but he's a guy who can make some money overseas as well.
All right, so the basketball, I always get a kick out of people learning about BYU in real time when they weren't really familiar with it prior to. So my understanding is BYU knew they had A.J. DeBansa weeks before he went on First Take. And so I was watching it, anticipating he was going to announce that he was going to BYU. And the Stephen A. Smith reaction was awesome. It was just perfect. He was so confused. It felt like he thought he was being Ashton Kutcher, like he was being punked. But A.J. DeBansa announces his intention to play for Brigham Young. He, of course, 1 year of high school basketball here for a school that's like, you know what? I'm not sure what it is, but he's playing 1 year for basketball here for a place where apparently you can play basketball and maybe go to class. I'll just leave it there. The report, Ken, is $7 million for 5 months. I didn't know much about him prior to hearing the buzz. Then you watch him play, and it's just like, yep, he's everything that everybody says and maybe more. What does this mean for the landscape of basketball in the state, and what are your thoughts on AJ playing for BYU, and what kind of player is he?
It's a great question as to what it means because, as I mentioned with the Cooper Flag discussion, it's pretty rare now for like a freshman to move the needle on a program.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we've kind of seen that, by the way, with this year's BYU team. Like you have a guy who's mocked in the top 10, and you have another guy who at some point was mocked in the first round, and they're getting playing time. Like they both were starting most of the season, and yet BYU is not a surefire tournament team. And we mentioned it with Rutgers. Like they have 2 top 5 picks, and they're not ranked ahead of Utah. So just the presence of AJ DeBonsa is awesome. Like it'll bring attention to BYU. It will not guarantee basketball success. Like you still need to have a pretty experienced and talented roster around that guy to make it work.
For sure.
And that's going to be the question. Like, if everything goes right and they kind of retain the talent that they have on the roster, they'll be a top 25 team to start the season. And if they can supplement that with a impact transfer or 2 that has experience, that'll help. Like Duke brought in, like Mason Gillis from Purdue and Sion James from Tulane. These aren't household names, but they're very old guys who are very experienced. They already had Tyrese Proctor coming back as a point guard from last year's team. And so they've surrounded their group of freshmen with some experience and some talented experience, and the roles have fit very well there. And that's going to be the challenge for Kevin Young, because if the roles don't fit, then you end up with Rutgers, and you end up with a big disappointment.
So just to follow up, because I think BYU has already scheduled some big-time games next year, and when you have a player that is generational, it appears that AJ is, if he can stay healthy, like DeJuan Wagner back in the day, like a name that probably you and I only know, but Memphis was able to schedule some big-time games. I remember they played at MSG because everybody thought he was like an Allen Iverson clone. So what can this do for BYU's program as far as exposure? Are we going to see a bunch of like scheduling big games in big arenas so people can watch AJ play?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the BYU will certainly get priority on national television. They'll have those games that they schedule in non-conference, and then in conference play, we know the Big 12's TV deal isn't quite there with the SEC, and there's a lot of these games that are sometimes hard to find on streaming services, but they'll get the priority to play those games on ESPN and ESPN2 and regular networks, and that will be great. But if you're Rutgers, it's not as great. Like you do have to produce.
Yeah.
And if you can produce, like, hey, if you have an exciting year, you get to the tournament, you finally break through and get to the Sweet 16 or whatever, then the sky's the limit. And maybe that is the gateway to some sort of like consistent greatness for this program. But I would, I'm going to be a little cautious proclaiming that because they're just outside of Cooper Flag this year and, maybe Zion Williamson. There aren't a lot of examples in the last, 8-9 years of that happening.
All right, Ken, before I set you loose, best conference in college basketball this year?
Yeah, the best conference, it's not even close, is the SEC.
It's not even close.
Not even close. And I hate when people say it's not even close because often it usually is close when they say that. But no, this truly is not even close. The SEC, so I've been tracking stats, or I have data since 1997. And the SEC's non-conference plays, they're the best non-conference record of any league since then. Best scoring margin of any league since then in non-conference. And, this is with a league that has 16 teams. So it's, it's not like the ACC in, the 90s where you have, 9 teams or whatever. I mean, this is an enormous league. You'd figure there'd be 2 or 3 duds in that kind of league. But there really isn't. Like the dud of the league, one of the duds is Arkansas, coached by John Calipari. Like that's the situation we're at. And I'm not necessarily saying that John Calipari is remains to be one of the best coaches in the country at this point, but he's still, probably a pretty decent coach. He was able to get some decent talent into that program, basically brought his Kentucky roster over, and they are not competitive in that league. The league probably gets certainly at least 11 teams in, maybe 12 into the tournament, and it's just a meat grinder. So I suppose if you're a Utah fan, be thankful you're not in the SEC because it would be even more bleak there with just how difficult that league is.
We are inching closer and closer to March where people will fill out brackets. They need your information. Where can they go find your work?
They can find it at kenpom.com. You can get a 12-month subscription for low price of $24.95, access to all the stats that make me sound smart here when I'm talking to Spence. And it's a 12-month subscription, so it'll go all the way through next year at this time. So if you really want to get smarter about these teams and who's going to be playing in the tournament, it's a good investment.
Pro teams listen to him. College teams listen to him. It's kenpom.com. I've been a subscriber for a number of years. Ken, great to see you. Let's play some golf soon, okay?
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Spence.
Amy Donaldson, live in studio, coming up next. Did we go Nickelback here? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. For old Ken Pomeroy.
All right. Shout out to Ken Palm. Our music bumps on the show today are simply songs that we think are bad, but millions of other people seem to love. We did a little Train earlier. Came back a little Nickelback. Which one am I missing? We did one other.
I did Imagine Dragons.
You did Imagine Dragons, which is perfect. Our next guest, as soon as the U.S. Department of Education handed down the ruling on the Title IX, I guess I'll call it guidance, I thought of Amy Donaldson, who joins us on a Thursday. Amy, give me one song that a lot of people seem to like and you just think is horrible.
Oh, well. Oh, yeah, I'm not prepared for this. My musical taste is just not in alignment with anybody I know. I grew up listening to classical music and old country music, like Hank Williams Sr. So I don't know, things that everybody loves. I mean, anything by U2.
Okay. All right. Okay. Fair enough. Hey, we all have our thing.
The obsession. I'm not saying Bono isn't a great human being. I'm saying I don't understand the love on the music side.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Hey, that's the great thing about art. That's the great thing about music. What is for some may not be for others. All right. How you been? What are you working on? What's the latest in the world of Amy Donaldson?
I'm working on too many things. Some high school investigations. I think I've talked about it before, the international students coming to the U.S. to play. So still working on that, working on a podcast and some stories. Also probably going to be reviving my column in the next little bit. So look for that. And working on a lot of really cool stuff in women's sports. So, and I have two fosters who are looking for homes if anybody needs a lab.
Okay. There you go. Hey, before we get to the ruling, or I guess I'll just say the memo from the U.S. Department of Education about this new Title IX understanding, I did want to get your take on the fact that after setting a single season record for points and setting a single season record for goals scored and finishing third in the West and making the playoffs, although losing in the first round, we will not recognize this RSL team that takes the pitch in a few weeks. What do you make of them really getting rid of most of their attacking players and one of their keepers, and this new RSL team that is going to have a ton of new faces coming up in just a few weeks?
I love it. I mean, you're still going to have Diego Luna. I mean, and if he didn't endear himself to this fan base with his performance, was it yesterday against Costa Rica? I mean, that was amazing. If you weren't a fan before, you have to be a fan now. Playing with I guess it's a broken nose. He had surgery, I guess, afterwards, but and getting an assist after the injury, it was crazy. So we still have him. We still have Justin Glad. I mean, there's enough familiar faces, I think. I loved Amika. I thought he was one of the more dynamic players. I really loved him. I like the idea of the new Australian kid coming in. I don't know. I mean, there was clearly something off last year. I don't know what it was. I wasn't in the locker room. I wasn't in any meetings. I think I'm excited about it.
All right. I guess we'll see. As Kurt Schmidt has said on the show, I'm either the dumbest guy alive or the smartest guy alive. So we'll have to see kind of how everything settles in. All right, Amy, it is a new world of college athletics, and I continue to use the line that on this show I prefer to diagnose and not prognosticate, because trying to predict any of this is really, really tough. And we are awaiting a number of different pieces of guidance and legislation to come down that have not come down yet, but there was some significant news that came down last week from the U.S. Department of Education, and I'll just simplify it. Essentially, classes' future revenue distributions from a school to an athlete for his or her NIL rights is what's called, quote, financial assistance, which must be made proportionally available to both male and female athletes or risk violating Title IX. The simplest way to explain this is if you're at a school where 50% of the athletes are men and 50% of the athletes are women, half of the revenue has to go to both. And now this could change. We'll get to that in a minute. But what do you make of the ruling that came down last week?
Well, I thought it was a negotiation, a settlement. Was it like actually a ruling?
It was a memo. Yeah. It's the guidance from the U.S. Department of Education.
So what happened is I don't know, because there's also been an executive order in the interim that's repealing some of the Title IX guidance that was put into place recently. So it's very confusing, and I didn't like what the NCAA did. So they these power conferences, as part of a lawsuit, antitrust lawsuit, they basically negotiated a settlement, but they didn't tell the plaintiffs in the case, the people who were suing, exactly how it would work. So I don't know that all the administrative code that's going to oversee this has been written. I obviously think that you should make the same NIL dollars that are available to men should be available to female athletes. The question I have is, a lot of these NIL deals are funded by private collectives, and are they subject now to Title IX? Are they subject to Department of Education rules? And does the Trump administration rescinding that Title IX guidance that was put into place a few months ago, does that change this settlement? I mean, it's just an absolute gray mess right now. I don't think anybody can tell you how it works. I don't think anybody can tell you how things are funded, or, if I want to sponsor a player, I have the right to work with the player that I want to sponsor, right? So they've already talked about how this is kind of a freedom of expression issue, but I don't know how it's going to work. I am really stunned that they came to this agreement without some concrete plan in place of how it will actually work. Are you just going to guarantee that if a business wants to sponsor a men's team, they also have to sponsor a women's team? Like, this has always been the issue. We've talked about this even when the very first deals came in. This is going to get out of control. And again, I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. If you take football out of the equation, it's better, but more women play college sports than men. So unless you've eliminated some teams here and there at some schools, which has happened, you're going to have women are going to require more than 50% of the money in most cases.
So a couple things here. As we have talked about, the NCAA and the power conferences have agreed to allow each school to share up to $20.5 million in direct payments to athletes. That is via name, image, and likeness. So that's going to become a reality. I believe that is July. And in most cases, athletic directors have already come out publicly and said they intend to provide about 75% of that money to the football players. So back to the whole, is this a ruling? Is this just a memo? I mean, ultimately, the Department of Education is in charge of, enforcing Title IX guidelines. So this is them saying, this is what we believe you have to do to stay in the space where you're properly handling Title IX, and they are in charge of making sure that this does come down. Now, Trump's nominee to lead the Department of Education is Linda McMahon, who is the estranged wife of WWE founder Vince McMahon, because nothing is real. So what are some of the next steps here? Do you believe that once, Trump has now been sworn in, he's now the president again, once Linda McMahon takes over the Department of Education, are you aware of what those next steps could be to maybe roll this thing back?
Well, it's not Linda that's going to have to write the administrative rules. I mean, she'll have to oversee it.
Is it Ric Flair?
I hope. We could only hope. Because like I said, I do like that nothing's real. But I think the other thing is they just rescinded that executive order that basically the Biden administration had overhauled and created a whole bunch of new guidances for Title IX. And all of those have been rescinded with a new executive order. And so I don't know here's the thing. So say the schools try to abide by this agreement, right, and start writing administrative rules that would oversee it. And say they give 75% of the money to football, and then the 25% is split between the other sports, and the women find this a problem, it's not fair, and they want to challenge it. Normally the route they would go to challenge it, their website doesn't exist anymore. So the EEOC, Equal Opportunity, whatever that stands for, they're the ones that determine if the rules have been violated, if there is a case there. You cannot sue without permission from them. So I have no idea. I mean, nothing is real. I don't know what's going to happen. But I don't know if they don't abide by these rules, if they don't abide by the settlement, I don't know who's going to enforce it, because what normally would happen if you and I agree to a legal settlement and you don't abide by it is that I would go back to the judge or back to the court or back to the organization that negotiated this, the NCAA or the Department of Education, and say he's not playing by the rules that he agreed to play by. But if that no longer allows you to enforce equity rules that are gender-based, how do you enforce it?
Good question, and one that I clearly do not have the answer to, or else I probably just would have said it out loud. So you reference the payments that come from booster collectives that are from essentially donors or businesses around the market. So the memo, it's not as clear. And again, it is a memo. So here's what it says about that. It says the department does not consider money provided by a third party in an NIL deal as, quote, athletic financial assistance. The athletic financial assistance, according to the memo, is what has to be split equally. So, for instance, future revenue sharing payments, scholarship dollars. But if money from private sources, this is the memo, it's directly from the memo. If money from private sources end up creating a disparity in an athletic program, it is possible that NIL agreements could, quote, trigger a school's Title IX obligations. But your point, if there's no enforcement, is this just all hot air that essentially means nothing?
No, I mean, so say that happens. So, and I can see this happening. So the school is going to put the money where it brings them money, right? So they're going to promote. I mean, I just read an ESPN. They just analyzed how the Power Five conferences promoted men's and women's sports in a calendar year, and no surprise, they tweeted and talked more about their men's programs than they did their women's in 85% of the cases. So my issue is if they say, we're just not going to do it. We're not going to do, and nobody does anything unless they have to. This is really just the way human beings are. The reason these rules have existed is because nobody wanted women to participate. We didn't care if they got the same amount of money. We didn't care if they got an education opportunity. The rules are here because they wouldn't just play nice from the beginning. So now you have these rules. They're talking about, if these private investors create an equity, I guarantee you, I can tell you that's already happening at BYU. It is already creating an inequity. The trips you can take, the scholarships you can offer, the players you can attract are different for men's and women's teams with no NIL money, with no collectives involved. They're absolutely disproportionately in favor of men now. But who is going to enforce it? Because if there's nowhere for me to complain, or if there are no longer rules that can be enforced that allow me to say, hey, I'm being discriminated on the basis of my gender, what is the basis of my discrimination suit now? I don't know that there is one. And I don't know, they're shuttering all the DEI offices, all the offices that have anything to do with promoting and helping people make sure they're getting fairness from their educational opportunities and their athletic opportunities. And so I think in a lot of ways, people are just not even going to know what the options are. They're not even going to know. It's just like working in a building and you're the lowest paid person because you're a woman, but what do you do about it? Because if you go to your boss and say, you're not paying me as much as you pay them, he's going to say, fine, go get a new job. Go get a job somewhere else. Right? Like the reason the rules are there is because if everyone was fair-minded, we wouldn't have these issues in the first place.
All right, I'm going to ask the question, Amy, to set you up. Then I'm just going to duck. Shouldn't the bulk of the money go to the sports that generate the revenue?
No, because we taxpayers, public money is being used to fund every aspect of those buildings up there. The programs were built on the backs of taxpayers of both genders, and you use tax money. I mean, I have this beef with all of public investment into money. There has to be a benefit for everyone. And if you're going to purposely say we're going to just invest in football, and not I know of athletic programs that don't even make money, and they're built on the backs of the students that go there to get an education. They're built on the backs of the community that houses them, that pays higher property taxes so they can have a system of higher education nearby in their neighborhood or their town or their state. Because an educated workforce is it is better. It's better for everybody. Better education system raises the level of everyone's lives. It makes everything better. It makes the society much more efficient and innovative and success. And just in every way, it's better. But I mean, I was just talking to somebody else about this. If you look at the lowest studies of like rec sports through professional sports, every study says people who participate in athletics, even at a rec level or just a very, non-competitive way, their lives are better. They're healthier. They have lower incidence of suicide, lower incidence of mental health problems. They have lower dropout rates. They have higher grades. They are much more likely to have to go on and get higher education. It's just stunning to me that we're even contemplating not being as equitable as we should. If you just look at the NCAA men's and women's basketball situation that happened in 2021 and what has changed in men's and women's basketball, college basketball in just 3 years, I don't see that there is a better anecdotal, view of why we should strive for some measure of equality for women.
All right, before I set you loose, I emceed an event last week with a lot of very powerful, rich people in the private equity world, and they all are looking as venture capitalists to invest in sports properties. And one of the topics is what you just brought up and the money that's been invested in women's sports over the past couple of years. And there's the Caitlin Clark effect. Some of these WNBA teams, their valuations are sky high, and a lot of money is going into women's sports. Do you think the momentum that's been created by Caitlin and others, but Caitlin's had a big part of it, do you think it continues? Or are we approaching what some might believe is a bubble?
No, I think it continues. And I would argue that Caitlin Clark was made possible by that investigation in 2021, because what we discovered in 2021 was the NCAA was absolutely strangling women's basketball. They wouldn't let them use March Madness. They didn't invest in them separately. They didn't sell their television contract independently. That's why we couldn't do bracket challenges on women's basketball. The list goes on. The NCAA, if I hate one thing in my life, it's the NCAA. And they nearly killed women's basketball on their own. They, thank God for the social media posts of one athlete that showed the disparity and everybody was outraged at the reality. I just think people don't know how bad some of the inequities are. I know there are conversations here. You've helped us have these conversations about turning Smith's Ballfield into a place, a headquarters of women's sports and community access. That's still, that overwhelmingly won a vote amongst public people. People live in the city. And yet we're still dragging our feet about it. We're still wondering if it's a good investment. I don't get it. If we think vegetables are good for boys, why are they not good for girls? If we want to spend $1 billion making downtown a great place for men's hockey and men's basketball, why can't we make, 13th South and Maine a great place for women's athletics? Why is there the single biggest investment into just women's sports? A women's sports facility is $6 million, and that's Kansas City's. And without Patrick Mahomes and his wife, that doesn't exist. At some point we have to ask ourselves, we're pouring billions of dollars, public money, our money, taxpayer money, into facilities for men. When do we spend a few thousand or million on women?
Amy, I knew you'd be good with this today, so I appreciate your time. Let's get you in studio soon, okay?
Absolutely.
All right, Amy Donaldson. Special guest live in studio coming up next. Don't go anywhere on ESPN 700. All right, we got Tim McMahon joining us. We'll break down the latest trade by the Utah Jazz and all things NBA. We're going to do a little sports court later on. We'll get back to NFL football in the 5 o'clock hour. But we have a special guest live in studio. I'm thrilled that we have a new client. It's Ogden Clinic Hadley Dermatology. And my buddy Jason Hadley is live in studio on a Thursday. Jason, happy Thursday, man. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. It's good to be back on a job site with you.
All right. It's great to see you. Once upon a time, Jason and I sold living scripture videos out of our trunk in Michigan. That's a true thing, but we don't have to get into it right now. So, Jay, here's where I want to start. So, Ogden Clinic Hadley Dermatology. You're obviously a dermatologist, and you're one of the best at what you do. Let's start here. So, I'm a golfer, as you know. You like to play golf as well. And every year, you just check in. You're like, dude, you're out in the sun a lot. Just come in to get checked out. What can early detection of potential skin issues due to sun exposure do for people to kind of get ahead of things that could be otherwise problematic?
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about just the scope of the problem in Utah. Utah has one of the highest incidence of skin cancer in the nation. And, that's primarily due to our genetics, high elevation, plenty of time out sun. But when you add on top of that, going out, being in the sun, golfing, just the outdoor sports that we like to do, those rates really start to skyrocket. Mm-hmm. And so in my life, there's not a day that goes by that I don't diagnose 5 or 10 skin cancers.
Every single day?
Every day.
Wow.
Yeah, every day. Some days substantially more. And so it's a high burden. It's a high issue in Utah. And there's a big difference between catching something when it's small, when it's easy to remove, versus something that's neglected and advanced. You're talking about a small procedure versus a facial disfiguring procedure if needed. Furthermore, melanoma is quite a deadly disease, and those rates are also specifically super high in Utah. And that's a terrible disease and not something you want to ignore. But again, these can be detected early, and then you don't have to go through those advanced treatments when they are detected early.
So what's the process? If somebody's listening right now and he's like, you know what, I do golf a lot, I do ski a lot, I do hike a lot, I'm in the sun a lot. Mm-hmm. What's the process when they call you just to take them through an easy checkup?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It might be a little bit uncomfortable getting naked for a stranger, but we make it as comfortable as possible. And the visits are pretty straightforward. You come in, you get in a gown, and then we begin to methodically check you over, and we look over as much as your skin as you'll let us. The more we see, the better we do. And it involves having one other person in the room to take notes, and quite frequently we have to take a little biopsy of something just to review it under the microscope. But those procedures are quick. Those procedures are easy, and people recover from those if needed at all. There's plenty of people that come in, and they leave with just peace of mind.
So you're famous and popular in our ecosystem for helping women with anti-aging products. And
this we do as well. Utah has the same things that cause skin cancer cause skin aging. And so we have a variety of techniques that we employ to help you look younger, help your lady look younger, prevent that sun damage, reverse some of that sun damage where we can. I work with a team of estheticians that specialize in this and recommending products that are right for your skin type, because one product isn't right for all.
So my pea brain, because we were talking off air, like you said, don't ask me about sports. And I said, well, don't ask me about dermatology. My pea brain says Botox, right? You offer Botox. Is that an old thing? Is that still a thing or what?
It's a ubiquitous thing. I think people would be surprised by the amount of people that get that done. And it's a way of just kind of softening it. A lot of people come in just to get that procedure. So when they're concentrating, they don't look angry. Mm-hmm. We do this for a lot of female professionals that when they're at work, they're just concentrating and people think, perhaps they're angry, and they're not. And so we'll do that. We'll do it just for wrinkle prevention. People that start early on that tend to develop less and not as deep lines as they age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Again, my pea brain looks and says body sculpting, and that is you do something to make the body look like a sculpture. What, Jason? What is body sculpting?
The services that we offer are called Cool Sculpting. This is a device that hooks to your fat, freezes it, and kills it. And so that sounds barbaric, but it's not. There's a little bit of swelling. It's an in-office procedure. Typically takes about an hour. And we target those areas that are just left over. People talk about the muffin top, and we'll go after that. But we'll go under the chin area to help with people that have excess tissue, excess fat in their under chin area. And it's a simple in-office procedure with minimal downtime that people see some pretty good results with.
All right, we'll end with laser treatments because you have a special offer for ESPN 700 listeners. So again, P-Brain, laser treatments. I have hair in places I don't want it, and you just take it off with a laser.
We take it off, yeah.
Okay.
So if you've got the gorilla back, come on in. We've got a 25% special, and we're happy to treat all areas that you're looking to get done, even if it's just for dingleberry prevention. We can help you out with that.
Which is important?
Yes, it is absolutely important. So it's 25% off. So go ahead and call the office. We'd be happy to see you, schedule a consult, or just move ahead with the procedure.
I'm telling you, if you are interested in any of these services, I've known Jason for years and his brother Michael. You are in good hands. 25% off laser hair removal, which is a great deal, but you got to take advantage of it now. So give them a call at 801-657-5664. That's 801-657-5664. 801-657-5664. If you're a golfer, you haven't been checked in a while, get it done early. You can visit HadleyDermatology.com. Jason, great day to be at Tate, man. Good to see you.
Good to be with you.
All right, more coming up next right here on ESPN 700. See? Utah Jazz lost to OKC last night, but it was a fun game. Shea went for a cool half 100, as you do. Our next guest covers the NBA and the Utah Jazz for ESPN. Great to have Tim McMahon back on the show on a Thursday. Tim, happy Thursday, buddy. How we doing?
Howdy, partner. Doing just fine. Missed you a couple days ago.
Yeah, appreciate you. Appreciate you joining us today. And obviously, we have to lead with a trade that was made by the Jazz. And I think at first glance, a lot of people around here are raising their eyebrows a bit. But when you dig into it, Tim, it does make a lot of sense. Now, they sacrifice additional possibilities to grab talent in the name of hoping Phoenix is bad in 2031. But if this thing works out, I think Justin and Danny are going to look really, really smart. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, this is the exact kind of deal that the Utah Jazz should have been seeking out and have been seeking out. And honestly, this is a deal that in a lot of ways is straight out of the Sam Presti playbook. These are the sorts of deals that Oklahoma City's been making over these last few years. And Oklahoma City, by the way, offered something very similar to make this deal. OKC also wanted that 2031 pick. The same offer, the lesser of their picks in 3 draft classes. Of course, the lesser of OKC's picks is always going to be OKC's pick, which is going to be like 29 or 30 probably. So the Suns took the Jazz's offer, hoping to get a little bit better picks out of the deal, but it's a quantity for a swing at what could be extremely high quality. And it's not like the Jazz don't have a stockpile of first-round draft capital still. I think they've got 11 first-round picks over the next 7 years, including their own, aside from one they might have to eventually give up to OKC, including that top 4 protected Lakers 2027, and now the 2031 Suns pick, which might be their most valuable asset in terms of those picks. Think about Kevin Durant's going to be like 43, I think, 42, 43 in 2031. The Suns have burnt all of their picks between now and then. They're just hanging on, trying to sneak into the play-in at this point. Desperately trying to acquire a 36-year-old. Everything they're doing is now, and try to figure it out down the road with no assets. Again, this is a great deal for the Jazz because it gives them a chance to, it's down the road. I know it's hard to get excited about 6 years down the road, but it gives them a chance of what could be a very high lottery pick.
Well, and Zanuck was on the Jazz broadcast last night, and I was eager to hear from him because I just kind of wanted to hear where he was at with the whole process. And, they have been saying all along, we want as many bites at the apple as possible. But Zanuck last night basically said, well, a bite like this is not how he put it. This is me interpreting it. But a bite like this is the type of bite that we need to find a generational piece. And there are plenty of examples of players that have been found in the mid-first round or late first round or Jokic at 43 that are generationally special, Tim. But you got to play the odds. And the odds are if you want to find a piece that's generational that could do something special and stay here for a while, it's probably got to be in the top 3, top 5, and hopefully number 1 overall. So you get the whole sacrificing, and they clearly have also done their calculation on probably Cleveland specifically and have said, okay, this year, the least of these 3 picks this year is probably going to be 29 or 30. In 2 years, Cleveland's still going to be good. So, and then who knows what will happen in 4 years. But this also, I think, is them doing their calculation on all 3 of these draft assets and believing the least favorable in every draft will be late first round.
Yeah, no question about it. They didn't make this deal thinking they were giving up the 15th pick in multiple drafts. This year, like you said, obviously going to be 29 or 30. And look, the Jazz, half their roster right now, over half their roster is college age. They're going to have multiple picks in this draft already. They didn't necessarily need to bring in another young player and try to figure out a roster spot for him. So it made sense to try to move picks back, at least move one of their picks this year regardless. And it makes sense to kind of spread their picks out a little bit. But, yeah, you want as many bites at the apple as possible, but what they're doing is they're trying to get a chomp at a big old sweet apple.
Yep, and you totally understand why they're doing it. Ultimately, when it comes to the Minnesota portion of this, because I said initially, okay, they think Cleveland and Minnesota are going to be good for a while. And the Timberwolves have been better as of late. I think they're still probably going to at least be a play-in team. But As we analyze who Minnesota is this year, is there any chance you think this draft capital that starts to come the Jazz way could be a lot better than they expected either this year or moving forward from the Timberwolves?
Listen, there's a very real chance it could be better this year. I agree. They're going to be at least a play-in team. I just saw the Wolves last night in Dallas. They're a team that I've written about recently, that I have good contacts with, that I cover on occasion. They're scuffling. And, I think it's going to be tough for the Wolves to move into the top six guaranteed. If they're a play-in team, dude, it could be a lottery pick, and you didn't expect a lottery pick right now when you made that deal. That's for sure. That'd be a massive bonus. I think the pick probably ends up early non-lottery, so somewhere in that like 17-ish range. But again, that you'll take that. That's a better pick than you probably thought you were going to get.
Will Hardy's been very honest with his assessments post-game, and he's been a lot more upbeat as of late than he was prior to. What sort of benefit down the road, Tim, can this team reasonably expect to receive in exchange for playing close games against really good teams consistently, which is what they've been doing all year, and it's what they've been doing for the past 3-4 weeks, and it's what they did last night against potentially the best team in pro basketball?
Well, there's a few different things. For the young guys, it's legitimate developmental opportunities, experience, and an opportunity for the front office to evaluate them. So those are all critical things early on in a rebuild. For some of these older guys, when they are playing, which obviously the injury report is interesting reading on a day-to-day basis. But when they are playing, and I'm talking about the non-marketing folks here, I'm talking about the Clarksons, the Sextons, the John Collins. It's an opportunity for the Jazz to showcase them. We understand there's going to continue to be conversations about those guys with other teams. The Jazz aren't feeling desperate to move any of them, but will trade one or multiple of those guys if there's value to be had. If there's a deal that makes sense. So the showcase opportunities have some value. But really, look, obviously, when you go big picture, the point of this season is to put yourself in lottery position. But there's ways to do that are productive, and there's ways to do that are destructive. If you're getting blown out every game, you might as well just burn the roster down, because what you're going to have is a roster full of guys who are developing bad habits, a roster full of guys who are, just learning not to care about winning, not to care about being competitive, not to care about development. That's not what the Jazz are trying to do. That's not really what's happening here. And all these guys aren't going to make it, but all these guys will have opportunities develop, and all these guys are being evaluated right now.
This is probably admittedly, a sports talk radio black magic trick to try to make a topic out of something that really isn't there. But because I've asked your buddy Tom Haberstroh, who actually had a little bit of data that was somewhat interesting, because of course he did, on the potential adverse effect of sitting a star player incrementally in his prime during the season, because you can't replicate NBA games. In Markkanen's 27, all of his numbers are down, and he's played 32. It's not like they're sitting him a ton, but is there any danger? Because I just go back to the Colts with the Andrew Luck thing. You don't want to waste one of your best players' primes, and their goal is to get good quick. But anything there, meat on the bone with Markkanen sitting and not producing the way he was a couple of years ago?
What did that Dork Haberstroh have to say?
He had some data on, basically players that have been in Lowry's situation, and how he wasn't backing up the case that maybe this is bad. He was just saying, the numbers are going to be down based off of star players that have sat incrementally during rebuilds because they're not playing as much basketball. I don't know how much is there, but Lowry has not produced the way that we are accustomed to him seeing.
He hasn't. And look, again, I haven't talked to Lowry, honestly, since they came through Dallas earlier in the season. I would imagine that it's difficult for him to be fully locked in when he's on the floor, understanding what the circumstances are. I would say that Lowry Markkanen's talent and ability would rank very far down the list of Jazz concerns. I would perhaps even be in the least of all concerns. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but I look at Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. Look, when I was calling him the Oklahoma City Tanker a few years back, he played 35 games one season. He played 56 games the next season. He had just the most persistent nagging case of plantar fasciitis in the history of mankind. Just like those back spasms keep on popping up for poor Lowry. I would say that Shea's doing just fine for himself. Now, this was early in Shea's career, but I would even argue there's perhaps even more jeopardy because, when you're 22, 23, I would say the reps are more valuable than when you're 27. Of all the things to worry about, Lowry Markkinen would not be on my list.
Well, and as an employee, if your boss says, hey, we're giving you a raise to $42.1 million and you don't really have to play much, you're probably okay with it, is my guess.
Well, here's what I'll tell you. Lowry knew exactly the situation that he was signing up for when he signed that extension, in which they gave him every single dollar they possibly could, fully guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
So, they did right by Lowry from a financial standpoint. He understood what he was signing up for. Obviously, the plan is for this team to be much better next year, the year after that, for this thing to take not just incremental steps, but significant steps and get competitive. I'm going to say sooner than later. We'll see how quickly that can be. If that plan fizzles, then there might be a point where the Jazz and Lowry get together and come to a mutual decision that it's time to move them. But they went into this thing absolutely on the same page, and none of them thought this was going to be just a stroll through daffodils and sunshine to an All-NBA season for Lowry this year.
All right, so trade rumors in the modern day and age of NBA media are tough to, I usually just simply go to the website of the people I trust, but I'm also a human that is on the internet, and so you see things pop up here or there. I've heard potentially John Collins to Minnesota. I've heard Jordan Clarkson to Dallas. I've heard Colin Sexton to a number of places. I mean, the Lakers have a couple of firsts to trade. If you can get good draft capital for any of them, I think you do it. But what are you hearing as we inch towards February 6th, specifically about the Utah Jazz?
I mean, I can tell you that I don't understand how Jordan Clarkson to Dallas makes sense for the Dallas Mavericks from what they would have to give up just to make the salaries work perspective. From they don't have a whole lot of draft capital, and also Jordan Clarkson can help some teams, but I don't see why the Mavericks would be a team that's on that list. Having said, dude, the Jazz are talking to every team in the league. The Jazz are taking calls. They're making calls. They are motivated to get value, and this has not changed since the summer. They are motivated to get value for Clarkson, for Sexton, for Collins. You're going to hear a ton of rumors. Some will be pulled out of people's cavities. Some will have some legitimate smoke to them. Again, some of them are pulled from just people getting on a trade machine and trying to pretend like they know what's going on.
You think any of the Walker stuff is real at all? I can't see it. Everyone's tradable outside of a very small group of people. I don't know, man. I've been so impressed with him this year. I don't see him moving on from him.
I can tell you with extreme confidence that it would take a haul to get Walker Kessler from the Utah Jazz.
Yeah.
A haul. I don't see it happening. Walker's had a great year. They are extremely happy with the progress that he's made. With the way he attacked last summer, the way that he's built off of that. He's 23 years old. For a rebuilding team to give up a 23-year-old who, they can have reasonable hope of being their starting center for the next decade, I'm not telling you he's untouchable, but you have to dig deep to get him.
How does this Jimmy Butler thing end? It feels like it just has to. I've told you this before. When the news came down and you actually look at where Miami is and you understand who Jimmy is at this point in his career, I understand Pat Riley. I understand Miami saying, look, it doesn't make sense for us to trade you. We're going to play the long game. But when he plays, he's not engaged. He's doing the whole thing Kobe used to do at times where he's like, I'm just going to pass the entire game because I don't really want to try hard. He's been suspended again, this time for missing a flight. It feels like this thing has to come to a head, and he's got to go. But I don't know, man. How do you think it ends?
Well, he's got to go unless it's a deal that would be a bad deal for the Heat. And a bad deal doesn't mean pennies on the dollar. A bad deal means a bunch of money on your books because of this trade, for them moving past 2026 free agency. Like, Miami's going to be a free agency destination. And if they don't take back long-term money, they've got a chance to make a splash in that 2026 summer. They're not going to do anything to jeopardize that. Look, at this point, obviously moving him has been a priority. They've been working on this. I mean, the Suns are working hard to try to make it happen. Obviously, they didn't have a deal lined up when they made the trade with the Jazz to split their, dollar bill worth of a draft pick into three quarters. But they've got three quarters that they can pass around to different teams now, because this is going to have to be a 3-team trade, 4-team, 5-team, like one of these multi-team monsters. And again, I think at this point, it's probably, I would say more likely than not that it happens with him going to Phoenix. But if Bradley Beal says it ain't happening, it ain't happening. And Miami's not taking him. So we'll see. I would say stay tuned.
Feel like the Pelicans have to do something. You referenced the Suns. There are plenty of teams that feel like it makes sense to make a move, but that's one thing to say. It's another thing to actually see how it goes down. What else are you hearing? Teams, active players available, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, the Pelicans have to make at least a minor move to get under the luxury tax, because you're not going to be a top 5 lottery team and pay luxury tax in a small market that's never paid luxury tax before. So they have to do that. They want to trade Brandon Ingram at this point. He definitely wants to be traded. That's obvious. Again, though, it's tough to move that kind of a contract in today's NBA with all the, first apron, second apron, these handcuffs, those handcuffs. And they don't have to trade Brandon Ingram. If they don't, it seems unlikely that they can re-sign him this summer, but they might be the highest bidder. And if they're not the highest bidder, he might need their cooperation, probably will need their cooperation on a sign-and trade. So, Butler and Brandon Ingram are Butler, Brandon Ingram, and Zach LaVine. And early in the season, I would tell you Zach LaVine, it was going to be pretty much impossible to trade him. But, dude, Zach LaVine's having a very good season. Like, he's scoring in the mid-20s very efficiently. So I think it's much more likely that the Bulls can find a taker for LaVine than it was even a couple months ago. And those guys, and then Cam Johnson, the Nets are doing this thing where they're saying, well, we don't have to trade him. I would be surprised if Cam Johnson's not moved.
Tim, before I say you lose, because I know you got to get to it, are we inching closer and closer just to say, like, it's OKC and everybody else by far? I mean, Chet's played 10 games. And it just seems like they have a level they haven't even found yet. Is it time to say it's them and everybody else out west?
I don't think you can say that because they haven't won the West yet. Mm-hmm. This is not a team that has championship experience. You can say they are the best team in the Western Conference, but, they've got to prove in the playoffs before you say OKC versus the field. As far as the biggest challengers, a month ago, I told you it was the Dallas Mavericks. A lot has happened in the last month, and not much of it's been good. A lot of it's been really bad for the Mavericks. Right now, I think you'd have to go with the Denver Nuggets. Two-time Jazz cut Russell Westbrook is fitting in awfully well next to Joker in Denver. And, Jamal Murray has started around into form. That's the biggest thing for them because, look, Joker's obviously a monster. Like, he's won 3 MVPs. It'll be him or Shea this year. Take your pick. They're both awesome. So I can't say OKC is just far and away. They're winning it. Nothing else is on the remotely possible. But boy, the Thunder are really, really good.
When you say you missed me a couple days ago, that does not mean you came into town and did not call me, correct?
No, I mean, usually you have me on Tuesday, but I guess you had some bigwigs in on Tuesday.
No, okay. Because if you come into town and don't use my phone number, we're going to have an issue. You know that.
Well, listen, you can just go down to Junior's. You can find me.
All right, buddy. Appreciate the time. Have a good week. Thanks, Tim.
Hey, we got to get this thing sponsored by Juniors if I'm going to keep giving them shout-outs.
On it. I'll get on it right after the show.
All right, sounds good, man. I appreciate it.
The great Tim McMahon at ESPN_McMahon is where you find him. He covers the NBA for ESPN, covers the Jazz, specifically when the Jazz are good and trying to win, but some interesting things happening in Jazzland right now. And obviously, as we see the end of the football season, college football now behind us, and the NFL with only 3 games left, we'll, of course, move a lot of our coverage over to pro basketball and college basketball as well. We'll get back to some NFL football in the 5 o'clock hour. We are just a few days away from Conference Championship Sunday. Bills seeking their first Super Bowl appearance since 1993. Second AFC Championship appearance since 2020. Of course, this is a rematch for the right to go to the Super Bowl. Referenced this a little bit earlier. Was surprised to see, maybe I shouldn't be surprised to see this, but we started the show off with why, as sports fans, we typically love you until we don't. The Kansas City Chiefs, when they burst on the scene with Patrick Mahomes under center, were as entertaining as an NFL team could possibly be. Kind of the NFL's answer to Stephen Curry and the Golden State Warriors. Well, according to the data that we have at our disposal, the company that kind of polls the country to get the pulse on who is cheering for which team in which state, over 2/3 of the country cheering for the Buffalo Bills very hard. Just seems like we do this thing when a team wins a lot, and maybe it's the Taylor Swift stuff, maybe people are sick of the attention. I don't know. Can't speak to it. But we'll see what happens. I've said this before. I still kind of believe it. I started to believe it about a month and a half ago. This feels like Josh Allen's year. It just does. Feels like it's his time. He's too good not to win a Super Bowl. He might be too good not to win multiple Super Bowls, but Kansas City has 15 under center. They have Andy Reid on the sideline, and they just seem to figure out how to win every single week. Chiefs-Bills is the second game on Sunday. First game is the Commanders and the Eagles. That line has moved away of the Commanders twice now. Philly is currently a 6-point favorite. That over-under is 47.5. Kansas City is getting 2 points at home against Buffalo. That over-under is 48.5. We'll get back to some college and pro football in the 5 o'clock hour. But coming up on the other side, we'll do a little sports court as we do every Thursday, so don't go anywhere. It is Sports Court time. We do it every Thursday, right about now, with our good friends over at Handy and Handy. It's Garrett and Preston, gentlemen. Happy Thursday. How we doing?
Doing good. Hey, Spence.
How are you?
I'm well. I appreciate the time. I can remember watching Lynette Woodard play for the Globetrotters way back in the day. So we have an update. This is she's a Hall of Famer, Lynette Woodard, 1985, the first female member of the Harlem Globetrotters. She is suing the Globetrotters, I believe. Let's get an update on the situation.
Yeah, Spence, I remember as a kid, every year the Globetrotters would come to town and play at either the old Salt Palace or the Event Center or somewhere, and I would go a lot of years. Curly Nail, Meadowlark Lemon, Goose Tatum, all those guys. Well, we're going to talk about Lynette Woodard, who was one of the best women basketball players probably ever, and she played back in the early 80s. She was an All-American at Kansas. She was a gold medal winner, the 84 team. And back in that time, there weren't a lot of options. She played a little bit overseas, but one of the options that came to her was to play with the Globetrotters, and she took that option and and went with it, and it was kind of groundbreaking, and I think a lot of people love to see it. Well, fast forward here, in about 2022, I guess the Globetrotters are still around doing their show. They launched a bunch of apparel and different things, and one of the things they launched was a sweatsuit that they called the Lynette Woodard, and they are marketing this and making money with it. Well, Lynette sees this and says, "Whoa, wait a minute! Back then, we never knew what name, image, and likeness was, right?" But she said, "Well, wait a minute. That's my name, image, and likeness. Can you really do that?" And there was some behind-the-scenes talks. It was interesting. They said, "No, you signed a contract that we could use your name, image, and likeness, or we could license this stuff in perpetuity." And they said to her, "Do you have the contract?" And she said, "Well, I'll look for it." She couldn't find it. And the suspicion is they don't have the contract either. So what she's done is she hasn't filed a lawsuit. She's filed what's called a petition. And what she's doing is she's filing a petition with the court saying, "Hey, Globetrotters, show me what you've got. You say you've got this contract. You need to cough it up so I can really see what my rights are to see if, yeah, in fact, there is a contract that you can use my name, image, and likeness in perpetuity, and you can sell all this stuff." And then she'll make a decision whether she actually wants to file a lawsuit. So we'll see what the response is from the Globetrotters, and it'll be interesting if they don't have this contract. Because if they don't have this contract, well, they're probably out of luck and going to have to pay her for what they're doing.
All right, Garrett, what do you think on this one?
Well, it's just not something that we deal with now, right? I mean, contracts are signed electronically, or there's a digital copy, and it's going to exist potentially forever somewhere on some hard drive. But I'm sure 40 years ago, this contract got signed and put in a manila folder in somebody's desk drawer, and like Preston said, may not exist. I guess they could look at maybe the contracts of other players from that era if they could find one. And there could be some testimony that, well, hey, yeah, everybody had basically the same contract, and if that clause is in there that allows them to use her NIL in perpetuity, then that may be persuasive. Might not be the end of the story, but that could be a way to go about it.
In a really interesting space with certainly college sports, as the Biden administration is, well, not on their way out, they are out. And a bunch of last-minute situations occurring, and now wondering whether or not the Trump administration is going to roll these back. I guess only time will tell. But what's the latest with what is this, a statement of interest in the House case filed by the DOJ?
Yeah, it's kind of strange that this happened when it did. Again, essentially on the Biden administration's last day in office. But the Department of Justice, they put together this, like you said, a statement of interest. It's really not anything binding on the judge, just an opinion and kind of potentially persuasive for the judge to consider. But they're saying, hey, as a Department of Justice, here's what we think about this settlement, and here are some of our concerns about it. And what it really comes down to, the concern that the Biden administration is putting out there, and again, it may not matter now because the Trump administration's taking over and the new Department of Justice, and they may have a different opinion about it. So I don't know that this is going to have a lot of weight. But again, just to kind of share what the concern is, I think mostly from the Biden DOJ would be really this issue with the salary cap, right, is a way to put it, where the teams have this, 22% or $21 million to distribute among its athletes. And they're saying, well, it's still a cap, right? This still runs afoul of antitrust laws because it's anti-competitive. Because there's a cap. We don't have players here with collective bargaining that have done this. It's a restraint on their free competition. So again, it's they're kind of putting out their legal opinions about it and looking to have some influence with the judge, but it may not carry much weight.
Preston, over to you, buddy.
Yeah, a couple of takes, Spence. Just the history. You remember the House agreement was reached last, I don't know, was it April, May? Big booming thing. Everyone, oh, wow, this is reached. Well, the judge sent it back to the attorneys and said, no, I'm not approving this. Then she approved it, and then 8 athletes jumped in and said, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to agree to this. They filed, all this stuff's going on. They said 22% was arbitrary. The other take is Garrett touched on, they're saying this amount, this 22%, was not bargained for by the players. So that could open a whole can of worms. What do the NCAA athletes, similar to the NBA Players Union, the NFL Players Union, the MLB Players Union, do they need a players association, some type of thing, to bargain for their rights? And would that mean, well, it would just be all the athletes, or would it mean there'd be one for the football group, the basketball group, the women's basketball group, the gymnastics, and so on? So it really could open up a can of worms. And one thing I had forgotten, this House settlement, if it's ever, the thought was it would be into play this spring. If it ever fully comes into play, it's a 10-year agreement. It's in play for 10 years. So that doesn't mean there won't be lawsuits and things filed along the way, but it's 10 years.
A lot of irony in our next story. The Cleveland Browns, their litigation with the city has now expanded to state court in the Art Modell law, which is implemented in 96. To ensure that they don't leave is actually now being thrown in their face as I read it. What's going on with this very ironic situation?
Yeah, the Modell law came into place when Art Modell took his team and jumped to Baltimore for the Ravens, and everyone was mad because their beloved Browns, who was probably one of the original NFL teams, so the governor signed into law the Modell law that basically said, simply, you can't move. Well, the current owners, they want to move to Brook Park, which I looked it up, and it's 13 miles. It's similar to moving to Bountiful. Okay, that may not seem like a big deal, but the city of Cleveland's like, and I'm sure they'd be still called the Browns, the Cleveland Browns, but the city of Cleveland says, not so fast. You can't do that. We had an agreement. You'd stay here. You stay in our city. And I'm sure the reason they want to do it is to have a big, shiny stadium, right? I mean, that happens. Everyone starts moving out. But so in anticipation of this, the Browns sued the city of Cleveland, and their main arguments was that the Modell law is not constitutional. They said it violates due process and that it's too vague. It doesn't address a lot of things like, well, how far can you move? And they also claim that it violates the contract clause of the United States Constitution, stating that, hey, we have a contract with the NFL, and the NFL, our contract says if the NFL says we can move, then we can move. And so you're not going to prohibit us from moving. So, yeah, it's interesting that this is coming up. And, I get it. Cleveland loves their Browns. They want them where they are. But at the same time, someone might say, well, 13 miles, is that a big deal? It affects everyone.
What do you think, Garrett?
Well, I'm surprised that other states, from what I can tell, do not have a similar law on the books, right? That would be, because I get where, the city or state is coming from, where they're saying, hey, if you're going to play sports in a taxpayer-funded, stadium that we've helped you build, there's going to be some restrictions on you moving, and you can't move. And Preston talked about this, but the phrase they use is you can't move elsewhere. But it's not clear what that means. Does that mean you can't move across state lines or out of the county? But just a little surprised other states aren't doing this as well.
All right, let's move over here with our final story, but there are several layers here. So when a new administration takes over the White House, most people don't really give a rip about what it means for the sports industry, but there are a lot of things concerning the Trump's administration's potential to reshape the sports industry, as a whole. So let's start with number one, the Department of Justice and their role in the House settlement.
Yeah, and we just talked about this, right? I mean, so we're going to potentially see a flip-flop here where the Biden administration, their DOJ, had an opinion about the House settlement, and now that Trump's team can come in, the DOJ, and have a different opinion about it. And again, is that going to have any sway at all? I mean, we talked about that already, that, Judge Wilkin has already, signaled some preliminary approval for the settlement already, but it potentially becomes up in the air a little bit, and there can be a change.
Preston, you're up, bud.
Yeah, we're going to jump to the next one. We're just going to fire through these. The other one that could be a hotbed, and we'll see what happens with the new administration, is, Biden, his administration was busy before he took off, and they issued what's called a fact sheet trying to address the issue of Title IX. We know Title IX is where schools receive federal funding. They can't discriminate with regard to gender. That's been a long time standing thing, but it's created a lot of problems. And basically what they're saying is they issued a fact sheet and say, hey, well, how is this going to apply with all this NIL money? Because, 22 million or whatever it is, 21.5 million coming to a school. Well, does that have to be divided equally between the male athletes and the female athletes? We know that's going to the football players, right? They're the revenue, they're the revenue producing sport. So they're just bringing up this issue and saying, is it going to be discriminating, and this could result in lawsuits. So it's just throwing it out there. Hey, how is this going to be dealt with? And, I think it's got to be dealt with because it's an interesting issue. They could argue that this is discriminating based on gender, because I think the revenue producing sports are primarily football and men's basketball.
Number 3, Garrett, I guess we're going to you here, right? College athletes as employees.
Yeah, exactly. And we've already seen a little bit of a 180 on this, right? We've talked before on the show about Dartmouth men's basketball players and USC football and basketball players seeking to unionize, right, and become be determined as employees of the school. And so we've seen a change here happen where those schools have withdrawn those actions, what they were looking for, because as executive agencies, the National Labor Relations Board, all of a sudden the chair of the board is going to be a new person. They're going to have Trump appointees put on here, and the feeling is that it's not going to be as favorable, that the Trump administration potentially is not going to support athletes as employees in this context with the NLRB. So we were already seeing that this is going to change.
Story number 4, sports media companies' joint ventures and antitrust enforcement. Preston, you got this one?
Yeah, this is, as streaming and bundles and everything come along, it creates some issues. And one of the issues is these sport media companies get together and they form joint ventures and they start streaming and they put together bundles. Is that going to create a monopoly? Is that going to violate antitrust, and anti-fair competition? And a judge recently came in and said it was problematic under antitrust law for competing media companies to place their live sports content on one streaming platform. Basically reasoning that you put this bundle together, people buy it, and they're buying it from one, and they're not getting everything. They're getting things they didn't bargain for. They're getting things that are unwanted, and it potentially creates a monopoly and unfair competition. And in the end, it could result in a detriment to the consumers.
Final one, Garrett. You get the hot button topic. Best of luck. Eligibility of transgender athletes.
That's what I was going to say, Spence. This is the hot button topic. It has been for a long time, and really just heats up even more now, I think, because Trump's already signaled his intention to sign executive orders, really just having a straight-up ban on transgender athletes participating in women's sports. And so I think we're going to see that. There's, already a lot of a push for that happening, and that's going to be rolled back where, again, before maybe it was a little more of a gray area and undecided. We're going to see some policies from the new administration for sure.
All right, gentlemen, before I set you loose on this Thursday, for any of our listeners who have legal questions, how can they get a hold of you over at Handy and Handy?
Yeah, we'd love to help any listeners out with their legal questions, especially in the area of personal injury, which is what we do. But you can reach us at 801-264-6677 or go to our website, handylawutah.com.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a great weekend. And as always, go Utes.
Ben.
Thank you. Go Utes.
All right. Garrett and Preston Handy, always appreciate their time. We will catch a quick break. We'll do a quick reset prior to the 5 o'clock hour. We'll do a little college and pro football in the 5, and we'll say goodnight at 6 on a chilly Thursday afternoon. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. So I'm mostly trolling with this selection if you're just joining us. For our music bumps today, Porter and I have been going back and forth playing songs that we do not like at all that most people seem to like. And I have a friend who I love very much because I love my friends, who for years and years and years been like, I'm going to get you to like country music at some point. I'm like, you're not. Just so you know, you will not. And I will say, I have come a long way, okay? Like me a little Zach Bryan from time to time, okay? Don't mind certain country artists from time to time. We talk about the old artists that you like, and a lot of them are great. I'll just never ultimately be a fan. I just won't. Wasn't raised around it. Don't like it. You can have it. And he thought he found his solution when Zach Brown Band burst on the scene. He's like, bro, I got it. Okay, I've been telling you for years. I'm going to get you like country music. And I don't know, man. I can't do the Zach Brown Band thing. I just can't.
I'm not like a huge Zach Brown Band fan. They got some good songs. I like this one every once in a while, especially when you're drinking a cold beer on a Friday night. You know.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. You know,
it's a little on the nose.
It feeds into the stereotypes.
And to be clear, you mentioning of all people when you bring up your friend trying to get you into country music, the fact that Zach Bryan is the one that is like you mentioned,
got a couple of songs,
but the fact that that's the name proves that you're not going to be there. You're not going to be like full on it.
Yeah, I just don't think I ever will. And look, maybe you, young man, need to just fire up a Spotify mix, send it my way.
I don't know if that's going to work because, like Amy, I listen to Woody Guthrie and Hank Williams Sr.
No, I'm good.
And like not even country music, but like Western, like literally a lot of times 30s and 40s music. So I don't know that that's going to get you if Zach Brown Band doesn't.
So I think ultimately we're just going to have to agree to disagree. You guys enjoy the country and the Zach Brown Band, and I'm just not going to be on board.
And the reality is that with country music, it's so old, it's so like established that there's parts of it in rock music that you listen to, in pop music that you listen to. So, you know, it's subjective.
I thought you liked Zach Bryan. Do you not?
I think he is talented. I also think he's a tool who writes corny, like very modern country songs about TikTok and social media.
Yeah, I'm not educated enough to like dig in and intellectualize Zach Bryan's lyrics, so I'm not really familiar on that level. I just have heard a couple songs. I'm like, yeah, this isn't bad. But maybe Zach Brown has a couple bands I could find, or a couple songs I could find that I don't necessarily hate.
Like you said, he's not a bad musician. He's a good artist. I've never been able to, and part of this is my problem, the fact that I listen to music that's like old, acoustic, and like I want to say relatable a little bit. I've just never really related to what Zach Bryan's putting out there.
Okay.
So.
Fair enough.
But he's talented. He's talented.
And that's the point of the exercise today. We are admitting
I don't get it.
That the songs we're playing we don't like, but you might, and it's all good. To each their own.
To each their own.
Indeed.
It's all subjective.
Utah Hockey Club in action tonight at Minnesota. They just had a 7-game homestand that came to an end. We talked about the Utah men's basketball loss to Houston last night. It was ugly. The Utes will be back home on Saturday at 2:30 against Baylor. So I will say what I said earlier in the show. As Craig Smith said post-game after the BYU win, fans impact winning, right? So if you're free on Saturday, 2:30, tickets are affordable. That building is so fun when it's full. Let's try to get out and support them, even though they got dog walked by Houston last night. Utah women handled Kansas in the Huntsman Center very easily. They're going to be back in action against BYU. Little rivalry women's hoops coming up Saturday. That is also at 2:30. That's down in Provo. Utah State back in action against Air Force coming up on Saturday. The Jazz are off, and they're going to take on Memphis coming up on Saturday as well. The Jazz had a really fun, exciting game last night, but they got Shea. They got SG8. OKC's good, and Shea is pretty incredible. All right, 5 o'clock hour comes your way. Coming up next, we'll get back to a little pro and college football all before we say goodnight at 6 o'clock right here on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. Proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. All right, what's going on? Drive at 5 time. Thursday afternoon, you're almost to the weekend. You almost made it. It is a chilly, chilly day, but a little bit warmer than it has been, and the sun has been shining. If you were driving up the canyon today to get a little skiing or snowboarding in, I would imagine you very much enjoyed it. If you're on your way back down, we appreciate you making us a part of your commute home on this Thursday afternoon. Your commute home starts right now. Been a busy, busy show today with a lot to do. Got about an hour left in the program. We're going to say goodnight at 6 o'clock for the Craig Smith Coaches Show. You can hear Bill Riley and Craig Smith, head coach of the Utah Utes, Utah men's basketball team. Talk all things Utah Utes. The men's basketball team went down to Houston, and they got good. That's a really good team. It's probably a Final Four contender. They're the number 3 team in the Ken Palm ratings and rankings. Speaking of Ken Palm, you're going to hear from him coming up in just a little bit. We'll do some college basketball. 70-36 was your final score. Gabe Madsen led the team with 8. Yep, and it was 8-5, and then things got loose. Houston has won 33 straight games in that building. This was as much about Houston being awesome as it was about anything the Utah Utes did. They had just won 3 straight games in the Big 12, and they're back at it coming up against Baylor on Saturday. That is going to be a 2:30 tip time, and I'll say what I said a little bit earlier. You know, I'll quote Craig Smith himself, head coach of Utah, after the BYU win last Saturday during the presser. And this certainly was intentional, capturing the moment that was in front of him. He said, look, fans impact winning. They just do. Crowds impact winning. And that building has been empty for far too long. And if you want the Utah basketball team to be good, it's pretty easy. Got to go watch them play. So hopefully Saturday against Baylor, a team that is good but is beatable, will bring, I don't know if it's realistic to expect the same crowd that BYU brought, but hopefully coming up at the Huntsman Center on Saturday, the crowd feels similar because that's how this team and this program will start to move in the right direction. Another home game against Cincinnati coming up. That is Tuesday, I believe, of next week before hitting the road against Oklahoma State. The Utah women had no problem last night against Kansas. And that game was over quick, man. That game was over quick. I think it was 21-5. Utah women were up 21-5. Yana Neepkins had a career-high 30 points. She had 6 3-point shots made. So we did a little college basketball on the program today. Utah Jazz played a really, really fun competitive game last night, but they lost, and that's the name of the game. That's the deal this year for the Utah Jazz. They got shade. They got SGA'd. OKC took care of them 123 to well, not 14. That would be a record. 123-114. And for the first time in his NBA career, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander dropped a cool half 100. So Jazz played well. That game was tied at 106, and OKC went on a run. Jazz going to be back in action coming up at Memphis on Saturday. So tonight off and Friday night off as well. And then Memphis is going to be the opponent on Saturday. And then the Jazz finally get some home games. 4 of the next 5 after Memphis will be at home. It's Milwaukee on Monday. Quick trip to Golden State. Then they're home against Rudy Gobert and the Minnesota Timberwolves, Orlando, Indiana, and Golden State. So Steph Curry in town coming up on Wednesday of next week, Wednesday, February the 5th. We had Tim McMahon on a little bit earlier, talked about the current situation with the Jazz and whether or not they'll be active prior to the trade deadline. We kind of broke down the deal that was made a couple of days ago where the Jazz sent 3 first-round picks to the Phoenix Suns in exchange for 1 unprotected first-round pick in 2031. I thought Tim did a good job today of kind of outlining the motivation for that deal and the potential of that pick becoming something really, really special. Now, it's hard to sell to a fan base like, hey, we might have a cool pick in 5 years. I get that. But apparently this type of deal is a new approach in the current landscape of pro basketball because you have teams like the Jazz, Oklahoma City, unfortunately, San Antonio, Brooklyn is in the mix, teams with more than 11 or 12 first-round picks over the next 4 or 5 drafts. And so I think we're going to see this deal become a little bit more commonplace in pro basketball where essentially you consolidate your picks so you don't have to add 3 players to your roster if you don't like 3 players in the first round, and then try to get an unprotected pick from a team that simply needs assets. And Phoenix needed assets for a few reasons. The simplest reason could be they can utilize now 3 first-round picks over the next 5 years to add affordable talent to their roster. That's simply number one. Number two, which everybody believes is the case, Phoenix will utilize these assets in future transactions, namely to get Jimmy Butler out of South Beach and get him to Phoenix to play for the Suns. So it's a 25 first rounder, it's a 27 first rounder, it's a 29 first rounder. It's the least favorable of the 3 picks the Jazz own. The Jazz own their own pick. They own Cleveland's pick because of the Mitchell trade, and they own Minnesota's pick because of the Gobert trade. So the Jazz have clearly done their calculation, mainly on the Cleveland Cavaliers, and have said to themselves, like, look, Cleveland's awesome right now. The pick the Jazz get from Cleveland this year, which will go to Phoenix, will probably be 28, 29, or 30. Could be the last pick in the first round. Phoenix is young, and they've got their core around for at least 2 years. That 27 first-round pick that goes to Phoenix, my guess will be it's 25 to 30. And then the 29 pick really is a bit of a wild card, but again, it is the least favorable of Cleveland, Minnesota, and Utah. So doomsday there is the Cavs are awful, Minnesota stinks, and the Jazz are not yet out of this rebuild, and that's hard to imagine in 4 years. And suddenly you're dealing with like the 3rd pick, the 6th pick, and the 8th pick, and you have to send a lottery pick to Phoenix. But in the off chance, and the only reason I say off chance, because if you look at the Phoenix Suns roster right now, which quite frankly, it's all you can do. It's hard to predict any of this stuff in pro basketball because things change at the drop of a hat. And Matt Ishbia appears to be a very motivated spender as an earner. So I think it's safe to say that Matt Ishbia is going to do everything he can to make sure that this team is competitive and really good year in and year out. But if you analyze the roster they have now, and even if you analyze the roster they could potentially have if they add Jimmy Butler's 35. In 6 years, in 2031, Jimmy Butler's probably not playing basketball, and if he is, it might be in diapers. Kevin Durant's 36, same situation. I think it's safe to say that Devin Booker is still going to be in the league and probably playing well, but he's 29 at this point, so Book is going to be 35 years old. 28, so he'll be 34 years old. Bradley Beal, who is a shell of himself anyway, in 5 years will be 36. As their roster is constituted right now, even if they grab Jimmy Butler, Nurkic is 30, Royce O'Neal, former Jazzman, 31, it is fair to assume that there's a chance that in 2031, Phoenix will find themselves in a scenario that could be similar to where the Blazers find themselves now, or the Jazz find themselves now, or the Brooklyn Nets or the Toronto Raptors, where, you know, a once proud organization with really good players simply is in a spot where they have to pivot, rebuild, and they're going to rely on playing young players. And so if that's the deal, and look, it's the ultimate wild card. That's why when I've been asked about this trade, I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea if it's a good deal. But if in 2031 we start that year and Phoenix is clearly in a rebuild and the Jazz own their unprotected first, we're going to look back on this and say Zanuck and Ainge are brilliant. But again, only time will tell. It's the same thing that I've said about the Gobert deal. It's the same thing I've said about the Mitchell deal. Like at the time when Donovan and Rudy were traded, the narrative was, oh, did you see how much value the Jazz received? Well, okay, maybe. You've got to turn those picks into something special. And so far, if we're honest, they just haven't. Now, the draft capital starts spilling in. But, you know, ultimately, Donovan Mitchell might be a first-team All-NBA guy. And, yes, you were able to get Lauri Markkanen in that trade. You were able to get Walker Kessler in the deal for Gobert. But if the Cavs go and win the championship, which as we inch along is more and more possible, and Donovan's a first-team All-NBA guy, guess who won that trade? It's not the Jazz. And, you know, last year it felt like Minnesota had a legitimate chance of winning something special. They did not. And this year they've really regressed to the mean. They had to make a financial decision to send Karl Anthony Towns to New York, and they brought in Julius Randle, who is kind of like Russell Westbrook, in my opinion. Like, you can have him, a ball-dominant player that doesn't pass it very well and at times can go off offensively and shoot well and get you 35 or 40. But ultimately, I don't know that Minnesota is winning around this year. I really don't think – I don't think they're a Western Conference contending team. I wouldn't put them in the top 5. And maybe, because they really are like an Anthony Edwards injury away from shutting it down, maybe that Minnesota Timberwolves pick this year for the Jazz actually lands somehow in the lottery, and the Jazz have 2 options to potentially move up and draft a very special player. But only time will tell. I feel the same way about this trade the Jazz made with the Suns as I still feel about the Gobert and Mitchell trades. It's impossible. We have to do the thing in this job where in real time we have to analyze this and we have to give you our take and we have to tell you what we think. But ultimately, it's hard to do the job for me that way because I know the deal. These things take time to manifest as far as what they're going to be for both sides of the coin. So only time will tell. But the NBA trade deadline rolls our way February the 6th. And the Jazz are rumored to be involved on several different levels, but we'll have to see what happens. All right, I talked about this earlier in the show. So we have the NFL games on our station because we are your home of the biggest and best football games in the market, whether it's college or pro. And coming up on Sunday, it's Conference Championship Sunday in pro football. It's the Commanders and the Eagles. It's the Bills and the Chiefs. Once again, we'll have those games here on the radio station. And I read a little something earlier today. I get these emails every day from a company. It's a sports PR company that analyzes who you guys are cheering for to win big games, right? So they do a bunch of research and data to try to figure out, like, who does the state of Utah want to win the Super Bowl? Who does the state of California want to win the Super Bowl? And they expanded it to the entire country, and 2/3 of the country is cheering for Buffalo to beat Kansas City coming up on Sunday. 2/3. Chiefs exhaustion appears to be real. Now, we just do this thing, as we talked about on the show today, where we love you until we don't. We love you until we don't. And to me, it's got to be deeper than simply just winning. I mean, I don't know. I know how hard this is in pro sports to build a consistent winner. And whenever anybody is able to do that and build a dynasty where they're winning multiple rings and multiple trophies, I look at it as the ultimate sign of respect, except for the Patriots, because I'm a Jets fan, so screw them. But besides them. So I don't really get the whole, because the Chiefs have a chance to make history. Andy Reid's a really likable guy. Mahomes is a generationally special quarterback. Maybe it's the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce thing. I can't really pinpoint it, but there are the majority of football fans in this country that aren't a member of Chiefs Kingdom cheering for Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. I'd love to see it, by the way. Dalton Kincaid, Cole Bishop, some local players certainly playing for Buffalo. And as I've said, this does feel like to me that it's Josh's year. Feels like it's Josh's year. But we'll see. I think it's going to be a great game. I think we have two really interesting games. And more really smart football people, I'll say, who I respect, believe the Commanders have more than a puncher's chance to take care of Philly. I mean, this Jaden Daniels story has been awesome. The line has moved away towards the Commanders a couple of different times. As we sit here right now, the Eagles are a 6-point favorite at home. The AccuWeather forecast is fine. It's not warm because it's Philly in January, but no rain or snow as of now. Kind of same deal at Arrowhead coming up this weekend. All right, time now for our PGA Tour leaderboard from our friends at Uinta Golf. They're doing a special on the new Callaway line, which is the future of performance. It's AI Smart Face Irons. AI's in golf now. All right, I guess that's the deal. So definitely check it out. I'm at Uinta all the time. And time for our PGA Tour leaderboard, the Farmers Insurance Open. It is round 2 at Torrey Pines. I believe they're on the North Course today. And as of right now, Lanto Griffin, that dude, is 6 under par. Ludwig Aberg, who was leading earlier, also at 6 under. Hayden Springer's at 5 under. Danny Walker's at 4 under. Luke Clanton, who's an amateur golfer, is at 4 under, as is Will Gordon and John Pack. Eric Cole finds himself at 3 under. Harris English, as well as Sam Stevens. And Joel Damon of Netflix fame is 3 under par as well. Zach Blair had a great round 1, but I'm still scrolling to find. Zach had a rough day. 6 over par today. He's now tied for 45th. He started the day in 12th. So there you go. Farmers Insurance Open, your PGA Tour leaderboard, brought to you by our friends at Uinta Golf. All right, Ken Pomeroy, North Star College Basketball. He's going to join us. Coming up on the other side, we'll say goodnight at 6 o'clock for the Craig Smith Coaches Show right here on ESPN 700. Bravo, young man. You're closing it out correctly. This song sucks on a number of levels. Number one, Fenway, Red Sox. I'm a Yankee fan. They think it's so cool. I've been at Fenway when they do the seventh inning stretch and all the Bostonians get up and sing a little Barry Manilow. It's not cool. It's cheesy. Again, Yankee fan, Red Sox. And also, I have a Barry Manilow story.
Do you?
Are you ready for it?
I am.
Barry Manilow, once upon a time, is he dead? No, he's around. Shout out to Barry Manilow. Hang in there. Once upon a time, so my mom was always anti-Barry Manilow.
Okay.
And I'm like, all right, he's not good, so fine. But once upon a time, Barry Manilow, when he would play concerts, would force the ushers to turn around and not watch him because they didn't pay to see the show.
I mean, listen, they are there for security reasons, Spence.
I mean,
they got to be doing their job.
Like, not only are you overrated and that song is corny, but you're also just like a bad dude.
Yeah, come on.
So why'd you pick it for
because
the final bump?
It's yes, one that it seems everybody really likes, or at least when it comes on at every stadium, every football game, every sporting event ever, including rodeos. Everyone loves it, and I'm just, maybe I just had too much of it. It's not like a terrible song or a terrible melody, but I'm good without it.
Wait, hold on. They play Barry Manilow at rodeos?
Isn't it Neil Diamond? I think it is Neil Diamond. But yeah, they do play.
Did we just rip
Sweet
on Barry
Caroline.
Manilow when we played a Neil? I honestly thought that was Barry Manilow this whole time.
I think that Barry Manilow just got a few stray shots from you, but that's okay.
The question stands. They play Neil Diamond at rodeos?
Rodeos I've been to, they play Sweet Caroline a lot. And they do the same thing with the,
But let's call it how it is. Barry Manilow, Neil Diamond, that's the same dude.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe. I've never seen him in the same place.
I'm just stunned that they play that at rodeos. Because I would think they would play Zach Brown Band at rodeos.
That happens. That happens for sure.
It's the best rodeo out there.
The best rodeo? The Oakley 4th of July, my man. Come on.
I mean, you're preaching to the choir.
we know this.
What about the Demolition Derby afterwards?
That's the Camas. I think that's like county fair time. That's always fun. Right. Rodeos in Summit County are that. I'll give you a top 3, and it's all those ones.
Oh, really?
Yeah, not really, but if you're asking me,
do all the big dogs come to those too? Like all the best
Oakley
rodeo
one,
performers? Yeah.
The Oakley one, yes, it's a PRCA event. It's the big deal. Not all of them, but you do get usually a world champ or two trying to win that buckle.
All right, before we catch a break, I want to tell you about my friends at Prize Picks, a very special deal. Jaden Daniels, 0.5 passing yards. Why is that special? They're giving you 1 square, and all you need to do is win 2 squares to win up to 1,000 times your money. So you pick 2 players, and then you pick more or less on their stat projections. My guess is Jaden Daniels is going to throw for 1 yard. So all you have to do is pick 1 more square. You can win up to 1,000 times your money. So Buffalo versus KC, they got Patrick Mahomes, more or less than 253 yards. Travis Kelce, more or less than 69 yards receiving. Josh Allen rushing for more than 48 yards. And then Jalen Hurts, more than 31 yards. Saquon Barkley rushed for a touchdown. So what that means is Jaden Daniels, 1 yard, boom, you got that square. If you decide to go, hey, Saquon Barkley, I think he's going to score a touchdown, boom, you got 2. You went up to 1,000 times your money. It's that easy. Now, check Prize Picks prior to the game because they will change between now and then. But between now and then, you should also download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download that Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks run your game all season long. Apologies to any Barry Manilow fans out there because he was definitely catching strays, but my point stands. Craig Smith Coach's Show. Coming up on the other side, Porter, before we catch a break, what comes our way on a Friday edition of the show?
On a Friday edition of The Drive, as we do each and every Friday, we'll chat with one Chris Kamrani. Not sure if he'll be in or not, but we'll get CK on the show. We'll talk some NFL with Lindsey Rhodes, some NBA with Howard Beck, and then we'll preview some NFL playoff action again with Stevenson Sylvester, the former Ute and NFL linebacker.
I got to sneeze. I didn't do it. That's a pro right there. I was able to hold it in. You know how hard it is to hold in a sneeze?
I do. I don't think you're supposed to do it. I don't know if that's real doctor's advice, but
Okay.
it doesn't feel too good.
Well, then I better get some checked out. But I was able to hold it in, and we'll say goodnight. Special thank you, Ken Pomeroy, Amy Donaldson, Jason Hadley, Tim McMahon, our good friends over at Handy and Handy. If you miss any of the sound from the show today, website, ESPN700sports.com. Download the app. Check out our podcast page. It's called The Drive with Spence Checketts. Subscribe, rate, review, say nice things, give us all the stars. It helps. For Porter and the station mascot Duke, I'm Spence saying goodnight. Enjoy your Thursday evening. Craig Smith Coach's Show coming up on the other side right here on ESPN 700.